Hey guys. Tonight's we begin with a century that swears it invented good manners, while secretly inventing some of the strangest survival rules humanity ever attempted. The Victorian world looks elegant from a distance, all lace collars and polished boots, but up close it feels more like a haunted etiquette manual written by someone who really needed a nap. You step into that era and instantly feel watched by 1,000 judgmental portrait eyes, each ready to scold you for breathing too loudly. Victorian people were not just navigating fog and soot. They were dodging disease, scandal, and social disaster, which is why so many bizarre rules existed. Every tiny gesture mattered, every glance had stakes, and every mistake had consequences that would make your social life evaporate like steam on a cold window. So, before you get too cozy, take a second to gently tap that new hype button YouTube just added. It really does help little guys like me push through the algorithm. And be sure to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this strange little corner of quiet storytelling. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's strangely comforting to know who else is drifting off with us around the world. Now, get comfortable, let the day melt away, and we'll drift back together into the quiet corners of the past. You step into the Victorian world and the first thing you feel is that someone is watching you, not a person in particular, just the century itself, looming over your shoulder like a strict aunt who disapproves of your posture, your breathing, and the way you are currently existing. The air smells faintly of coal smoke and lavender water, which is the historical equivalent of mixing perfume with anxiety. Nothing here is simple. Every cobblestone seems to whisper instructions. Every doorway radiates judgment, and the street feels like a stage where you have somehow arrived without a script. The moment your foot touches the pavement, you sense that the city has rules tucked into every shadow and soot-stained window. A pair of ladies sweep past you, skirts swishing like accusatory curtains. They do not look directly at you, which is how you know they saw everything. One of them adjusts her gloves in a way that definitely means something. You have no idea what it means, but it cannot be good. You straighten your back, which is also wrong because now you look too eager. The Victorian world thrives on these invisible tripwires. If you breathe too loudly, it signals arrogance. If you breathe too softly, it signals illness. If you breathe normally, you tempt fate. You begin to understand why everyone in this era looks perpetually tense. Life here is a long etiquette exam with no passing grade. You attempt to walk, an action that usually feels natural, but now seems suspicious. A man tips his hat at you, a gesture that feels elegant until you realize it is also a test. Do you nod in return, smile, look away politely, bow like a confused tourist? You choose a small nod, which earns you the briefest approving glance, the kind Victorians dole out the way modern people give away winning lottery tickets. It is in that moment you understand the truth. This world does not wait for you to learn the rules. It punishes you while you try. A carriage rumbles past, its wheels rattling like a warning. You step back, which is correct, but you step back too quickly, which is suspicious. A child selling matches eyes you with a knowing smirk, as though he has mastered the entire social code by breakfast while you struggle to stand without offending half the street. Somewhere behind you, a church bell tolls, and even the sound feels judgmental. The Victorians hear bells and think about duty. You hear bells and wonder if you are already in trouble. You decide to observe more carefully, hoping to blend in long enough to avoid being labeled as anything unusual. The women walk with small, precise steps, as if the ground itself is delicate. The men carry themselves like they are balancing invisible ledgers. Everyone moves with a mix of politeness and suppressed panic. Even conversations are elaborate performances. Greetings must be exchanged with the right warmth, but not too much warmth, or else rumors begin. Every phrase is coded. Every smile is a legal document. You begin to suspect the entire century is run by people who wake up every morning determined to outbehave each other. A gentleman nearby lowers his umbrella and accidentally splashes a tiny drop of water onto a passerby. The passerby freezes as though struck by lightning. The gentleman gasps. An apology blossoms between them like a tragic opera compressed into 10 seconds. You watch the exchange with growing horror. If such a small accident requires this much ceremony, what fresh chaos awaits you once you attempt to purchase bread or stand near a lamppost? The deeper you wander, the more apparent it becomes that these rules are not random absurdities. They are survival tactics, crafted by people who spend every day battling soot, disease, nosy neighbors, and the crushing fear of public embarrassment. A cough might signal contagion. A stain on a glove might signal poverty. A cheerful tone might imply impropriety. Etiquette is not politeness. It is armor, polished and brittle, worn by everyone from chimney sweeps to aristocrats. You feel the weight of it settling onto your shoulders. Even the shadows seem organized. The fog moves politely around lampposts, as though afraid to offend. Houses lean together in rows, each one quietly judging the curtains of the next. People peer from balconies with the sort of curiosity that pretends to be concern. Nothing escapes notice here. Not your clothing, not your hands, not the angle of your gaze. When you look at a loaf of bread, you begin to move more carefully, choosing each gesture as though it might be recorded in some invisible ledger of sins. Eventually, you exhale, slow and cautious, as though the air itself might be counting. You came expecting lace and manners, but you discover a labyrinth instead, and every path branches into new rules, each more intricate than the last. In this place, survival is not a matter of strength or cunning. It is a matter of decoding the unspoken laws that surround you. Victorian society does not greet newcomers kindly. It simply waits for your first mistake, ready to transform it into gossip before you can blink. You stand in the middle of a busy street, watching the world swirl around you like an orchestra of etiquette, precision, and mild hysteria. You feel the century studying you, and as you take your next careful step, you finally understand. In Victorian life, everything is a rule, and every rule is a trap. You quickly discover that public breathing in the Victorian world is not a natural reflex. It is a performance, a slow, measured art form perfected by people who spend their entire lives pretending they do not possess lungs. The moment you inhale a bit too enthusiastically, a woman clutching a parasol glances at you as if you have just confessed to a crime. Victorians do not simply breathe. They curate their oxygen intake with the precision of jewelers inspecting diamonds. Anything louder than a faint whisper of air becomes a social event, the kind strangers whisper about on the way home. You take another breath and immediately sense it was wrong. Too sharp, too open-mouthed, too alive. If you exhale too quickly, people think you are impatient. If your breath catches, they assume illness. And illness here is not just unfortunate, it is dangerous. A single cough can empty a room faster than a royal scandal. The Victorians live in constant fear of invisible particles floating through the fog, carrying inconvenient things like fevers and the reminder that their medical knowledge is mostly guesswork. So they develop breathing etiquette, rules designed to convince others that you are both healthy and morally upright through the simple act of not sounding like a wheezing accordion. You watch a group of well-dressed pedestrians glide past like swans on a lake. Their chests barely move. Their lips remain still. If they are breathing at all, it is an internal process hidden deep inside corsets and waistcoats. You try to imitate them and instantly feel lightheaded. The Victorians endure this daily. A hurried gasp signals panic. A loud inhale suggests desperation. Even a simple sigh must be deployed with care because it carries meaning. Sigh too deeply, and people will assume you are courting emotional turmoil. Sigh too softly, and they might think you are suppressing passion. Everything becomes a quiet form of communication no one explains to you. The obsession intensifies indoors. You enter a drawing room filled with soft chatter and immediately feel the air shrink. Breathing here is not just subtle, it is choreographed. Women sit with their backs straight and shoulders steady, taking small, graceful sips of air as though rationing it for a long journey. Men lean casually on mantelpieces, concealing their inhales behind polite nods. You attempt to breathe normally and spot an elderly gentleman flinch as if he heard a firecracker. You lower your volume and hope for mercy. Part of this comes from fashion. Corsets, starched shirts, and multiple layers of clothing make deep breaths nearly impossible. The attire squeezes you into a shape that Victorian society considers respectable, even if it means sacrificing 90% of your lung capacity. You realize most people here walk around slightly oxygen deprived and channel that faint dizziness into polite conversation. The result is a society that looks serene on the outside while quietly battling the urge to faint at any moment. Then there is the matter of propriety. Breathing too loudly in public feels indecent, almost intimate. Victorians prefer to pretend bodies do not make sounds. They avoid acknowledging anything biological unless someone is on their deathbed, and even then it is whispered behind fans. They treat breath like a secret, something to hide behind lace, posture, and awkwardly long pauses. You learn quickly that silence is the most acceptable soundtrack for social gatherings. Outside, the rules change again. The fog-wrapped streets of London carry soot and suspicion. People breathe through handkerchiefs not because it helps much, but because it signals caution and elegance. A person seen gulping air freely looks reckless. The atmosphere itself feels heavy with expectation, urging you to adopt the same slow, measured breaths everyone else performs so effortlessly. You try once more, inhaling lightly through your nose while pretending you are not trying. It almost works. A woman passing by gives you a small approving nod that feels like a diploma. For a moment, you think you are blending in. Then a sudden whiff of coal dust tickles your throat and you fight back a cough with the determination of a soldier holding a fortress. A single cough could undo everything, sending bystanders scrambling as if you announced doom. You realize something important. Victorians treat breathing as a delicate performance because it is one of the few things they can control in a world filled with uncertainty, illness, and constant judgment. They cannot tame the fog or the filth or the unpredictable whims of life, but they can master the art of appearing composed. For them, dignity lives in the smallest gestures, and none is smaller or more revealing than the breath you dare to take. You walk on, chest tight, lungs cautious, learning slowly how to inhale without causing alarm. In this world, grace is measured in breaths, and you are only beginning to understand the script. You learn very quickly that greetings in the Victorian world are less like friendly gestures and more like detonators. One wrong movement, and the entire street reacts as though you have proposed marriage, committed a scandal, or both. The moment you attempt your first simple hello, you feel dozens of invisible rules slam into you at once. Victorians do not greet casually. They greet with the precision of diplomats negotiating a fragile peace treaty. Every nod, glance, and angle of the wrist carrying more meaning than spoken language. You try to study the locals before embarrassing yourself further. A gentleman approaches a lady, walking at a pace so calculated he might as well be measuring each step with a ruler. When he is close enough, he pauses, lifts his hat exactly halfway, inclines his head just slightly, then delivers a greeting so soft you barely hear it. The lady responds with a specific tilt of her chin and a brief lowering of her eyes. The exchange lasts all of 3 seconds, but it contains enough coded messages to fill a library. You still have no idea what any of them are. Your turn comes far too soon. A woman in a pale blue dress approaches, accompanied by a parasol and an air of subtle judgment. You panic and lift your hand in an enthusiastic wave. The reaction is immediate. She freezes. A gasp escapes her. Her companion clutches her arm. You have not said a single word, and somehow you have indicated interest, informality, and possibly a proposal. You lower your hand slowly, praying it will erase the damage. It does not. Victorians believe greetings are dangerous because they reveal intention, emotion, and sometimes desperation. A greeting that lingers too long implies affection. One that ends abruptly implies disdain. If your voice is too loud, you seem uncultured. If you speak too softly, you appear suspicious. Everything is a delicate balance, and you are wobbling across it like a tightrope walker with no training. A gentleman passing by attempts to rescue you. He demonstrates a proper greeting, bowing at an angle that suggests courtesy without excitement. When you attempt the same gesture, you bow too deeply, which in this society means devotion. The woman in blue looks ready to faint. The gentleman coughs politely, which is Victorian, for you have just declared undying love to a stranger on the street. You straighten yourself and wish the pavement would swallow you. You try again with a different passerby, determined to master at least one greeting before the century ends. This time you barely nod, offering the faintest hint of acknowledgement. Unfortunately, Victorians reserve this gesture for people you wish to avoid, but must tolerate. The man looks wounded, as though you have insulted 3 generations of his family. You cringe as he shuffles away, clutching his hat with the solemnity of a grieving widow. By now you feel breathing would be easier than speaking, which is saying something in a world where inhaling is a performance. Greetings here are not simply habits. They are survival strategies in a society obsessed with reputation. Many couples in this era meet only a few times before marriage, so a greeting can be misinterpreted as a courtship ritual. A polite smile might be taken as interest. A handshake could imply intimacy. Even the placement of your gaze matters. Look too long at someone's eyes and you are proposing. Look too long at their shoes and you are insulting them. You finally understand why Victorians walk so stiffly. It is the only way to keep their bodies from accidentally starting a lifelong commitment. You begin practicing quieter greetings, the kind that do not stir the air too much. A gentle nod for acquaintances, a slight bow for strangers of equal standing, and a controlled, polite smile for anyone who looks as though they might faint from the shock of being acknowledged. You avoid raising your voice. You keep your hands at your sides. You treat every syllable as though it might hold legal consequences. After several attempts, something miraculous happens. You greet an older gentleman with a careful nod and a mild murmur of good day. He returns the gesture without shrinking back or calling for assistance. For the first time, you have not proposed, insulted, or emotionally devastated anyone. It feels like victory. As you continue walking, greetings come more naturally, though you remain aware of the tightrope beneath your feet. Every gesture still carries the risk of misunderstanding, but you are learning to navigate it with cautious grace. In this era, even a hello is a puzzle, and solving it is the first real step towards surviving Victorian society without accidentally acquiring a spouse. You learn almost immediately that walking in the Victorian world is not simply movement. It is choreography. People here glide through the streets as though their shoes come with instructions, and every footstep seems rehearsed to avoid offending pavement, pedestrians, or the occasional horse. You take a step, just one, and feel the city tense around you. It is as if the cobblestones lean in to judge your weight distribution. You attempt another step, lighter this time, but it still sounds loud enough to wake the ancestors. A man nearby turns his head, not fully, just enough to imply that your walking technique has personally disappointed him. Victorians do not openly criticize. They communicate disapproval through subtle shifts of the eyebrows. His are currently performing a small tragedy. The women fare even better. They move with tiny, precise steps that make their skirts sway like quiet metronomes. No heel clicks, no abrupt motions, just soft, controlled gliding that makes you wonder if their shoes are enchanted. You watch as they navigate a crowded street without ever brushing against another person. This seems impossible, given the layer of fog hanging over everything, but Victorians have mastered evasive strolling the way birds master flight. You try to copy the technique, taking shorter steps, shoulders back, gaze soft. Immediately, you learn that your stride length is an insult to half the neighborhood. Too long and you appear overconfident. Too short and you look timid. Walking becomes a negotiation with physics. You battle your own momentum, attempting to drift instead of stomp. A gentleman approaches, cane tapping the stones in a rhythm that clearly means something. As he nears you, he shifts slightly to the left. You, being polite, shift to the same side. He shifts again. You mirror him. The two of you perform a silent dance of mutual confusion until he finally slips by with the sigh of someone who has dealt with amateurs before. In this world, even yielding the right of way has rules, and you have violated at least 3. You watch a pair of young men walk with hands behind their backs, elbows tucked, posture impeccable. They look like they are escorting invisible royalty. Their steps are measured, their pace steady, their expressions solemn enough to suggest they are thinking about serious matters such as moral responsibility or the current price of coal. You try the same posture and only succeed in looking like you are preparing to confess to something. Then there are the children. Even they walk with purpose, as though late to a very important etiquette appointment. One small girl, barely tall enough to reach your elbow, passes you with such graceful precision that you feel obligated to thank her for the lesson. She does not respond. She simply lifts her chin, the universal Victorian sign for, yes, I walk better than you, but we need not discuss it. Horses complicate things further. They clatter by in a thunder of hooves and carriage wheels, forcing pedestrians to adjust their steps without breaking their elegant rhythm. The locals flow around these obstacles like water. You, on the other hand, nearly leap into a flower stall to avoid being trampled. A vendor eyes you as if you have committed a crime against horticulture. Victorians believe walking is evidence of character. Too fast suggests desperation or scandal. Too slow implies moral weakness or poor time management. Your gait reveals your upbringing, your class, your ambitions. They can read entire biographies from the sound of your steps. The absurdity of it all presses on you, yet you cannot help but admire the dedication. This is a society that turns daily movement into art. As the day goes on, you begin to adapt. You lighten your steps. You modulate your pace. You keep your arms relaxed but not limp. Eventually, you feel yourself blending in. A woman passes without flinching. A man does not glare at your feet. Even the cobblestones seem less offended. It is subtle, but it matters. In this world, walking is not just travel. It is a declaration of who you are, or at least who you hope they think you are. And as you glide down the street, still learning, still fumbling, but no longer a walking catastrophe, you understand the truth. Here, even footsteps carry meaning, and the ground beneath you is always listening. You learn very quickly that sitting in the Victorian world is not the restful act you once believed it to be. It is a trial, a public examination of your discipline, your upbringing, and possibly the strength of your moral character. Chairs, which in your own era offer comfort, here feel like traps designed by people who distrust relaxation. The moment you lower yourself into one, you feel as though you have entered a duel with gravity while being judged by everyone within a 20-foot radius. The first time you attempt to sit, you make the mistake of bending your knees like a normal human. A nearby woman gasps softly, the kind of gasp reserved for witnessing scandal or minor miracles. A gentleman glances at you over his newspaper, eyes narrowing with quiet astonishment. You cannot tell whether you have insulted his ancestry or broken an ancient law. You freeze halfway down, suspended in a strange hovering position that looks neither dignified nor physically sustainable. Victorians sit by lowering themselves delicately, as though placing their bodies in a fragile box. Their backs never touch the chair fully. Their shoulders remain pulled back. Their hands fold neatly into their laps, and their legs position themselves at precise angles that appear effortless only because generations have suffered through this ritual long enough to masquerade discomfort as elegance. You observe these people and begin to wonder if they have bones made of hardened expectations. You try again, determined to blend in. This time, you lower yourself slowly, cautiously, as if the chair might explode. You keep your spine rigid, but you overshoot the angle and land slightly too firmly. The sound is not loud, but in a Victorian parlor, every sound matters. The chair gives a small thump. Several heads turn. A child looks at you with the solemn pity normally reserved for tragic street performers. Sitting incorrectly is dangerous here because it reveals everything your clothing hides. Your posture announces your class. Your angles betray your confidence. The way your hands rest signals whether you are calm, anxious, or harboring forbidden opinions. Victorians can decode all this with a single glance, and they do so with great enthusiasm because gossip is the closest thing they have to a national sport. You shift your weight and discover new complications. Leaning back is unacceptable. Leaning too far forward looks desperate. Crossing your legs is practically criminal, unless done with meticulous refinement, and even then only in certain company. Every gesture must demonstrate restraint and control. You are beginning to understand why Victorian furniture looks so uncomfortable. It is not meant to relax people. It is meant to remind them that life is a series of tests. Across the room, a group of ladies sit with the grace of porcelain dolls locked into position. Their expressions remain attentive, their bodies impossibly still. It dawns on you that sitting this way for an entire afternoon is normal for them. They endure tea, conversation, and the slow passage of time without ever slouching or shifting. Meanwhile, your spine is drafting formal complaints, and your legs have begun to tingle. A man enters and sits with practiced ease. His movements are sharp but controlled, a brief display of authority. Yet even he maintains perfect posture once seated, as though an invisible judge stands behind him with a scorecard. Everyone pretends not to watch, but everyone watches. That is the Victorian way. You attempt a small adjustment, a gentle shift in your seat to relieve the tension growing in your lower back. This, you learn too late, is a mistake. One lady raises an eyebrow, another leans in to whisper to her companion. A third studies you as though you are a curious species recently discovered and already disappointing scientists. You sit still again, accepting your fate. The reason sitting incorrectly can destroy your reputation becomes clear. In a world where emotions, desires, and impurities must be hidden, the body becomes the battlefield. Posture is proof of discipline. Stillness is proof of refinement. An accidental slouch suggests laziness. A relaxed limb suggests indulgence. A poorly placed elbow suggests you were raised without proper supervision. And once suspicion begins, it spreads. You remain frozen in place, more statue than person. While conversation drifts around you like polite smoke, your back aches, your thighs burn, your neck stiffens. Yet for the first time, no one glances at you with concern or fascination. You have achieved invisibility, the highest Victorian compliment. It is in this moment of quiet suffering that you understand the true logic behind these rules. They forge a world where everyone looks composed, even if everyone is internally collapsing. And in that strange, shared discomfort, they find order. You straighten your spine a hair more, preparing yourself for the long afternoon ahead. In this century, survival is measured not in breath or words, but in how long you can sit without betraying that you are human at all. You do not realize how dangerous your eyes are until you try using them in Victorian society. You take a simple glance at someone passing on the street. Nothing intense, nothing unusual, and the reaction that follows is so dramatic, you half expect a violinist to appear and provide accompaniment. The woman you glanced at stiffens as though you have asked a deeply personal question. Her companion clutches her sleeve. A gentleman steps between you with the protective energy of someone guarding a priceless vase, all because your eyes lingered for a fraction too long. You look away immediately, but of course that is its own offense. Looking away too fast implies guilt. Looking away too slowly implies flirtation. Victorian eye contact is an endless labyrinth of interpretations, each more treacherous than the last. You begin to understand why so many portraits from this era show people staring into the distance with haunted expressions. It is safer to look at nothing. As you continue down the street, you try to keep your gaze low. This is what respectable people do, you tell yourself. But the Victorians have rules about that too. Eyes too low signal melancholy or hidden shame. Eyes too high suggest vanity. Eyes wandering too freely mean you are gathering information for gossip, crime, or possibly espionage. Every option is wrong in a different direction, and you cannot help feeling the century is enjoying your confusion. A young man brushing past you gives a small, courteous nod, then flicks his eyes upward in a gesture so brief it could have been a blink, yet it carries meaning. Approval, perhaps, or polite acknowledgement. You attempt the same gesture with the next person who crosses your path, but your timing is off. Your eyes linger just slightly too long, and the poor stranger flushes bright red. A moment later, you realize you have performed the visual equivalent of handing someone a bouquet of roses and promising a future together. Indoors, the situation becomes even more complicated. In a parlor filled with lace curtains and people sipping tea at a suspiciously slow pace, you learn that making eye contact with someone across the room creates an instant bond, even if you did not intend one. If your gaze lands on someone twice, it implies an unspoken question. 3 times signals interest. 4 times is practically scheduling a romance. You find yourself counting your glances like a gambler terrified of losing the game. A lady seated near the fireplace catches your accidental second glance and immediately lowers her eyes. Her fan moves in a small arc, a subtle gesture loaded with coded meaning that you cannot decipher. You panic and stare at the wallpaper instead. The wallpaper, mercifully, does not respond. Conversation adds another layer of peril. When someone speaks to you, you must look at them, but only at specific intervals. Too constant a gaze reads as intensity. Too little eye contact reads as evasiveness. You listen carefully to a gentleman discussing the weather with the gravity of a philosopher and try to match your eyes to his pacing. Every few sentences, you lift your gaze, then soften it, then lower it, pretending you understand this ritual while praying he does not decode your confusion. Somehow it works. He nods approvingly and continues, unaware of the heroic mental gymnastics you are performing. Then comes the greatest test. A young woman enters the room, graceful and composed, and offers you a polite smile. You return the smile automatically, then meet her gaze. It lasts barely a second, but she tilts her head in acknowledgement, the kind that suggests she is aware you saw her and saw you seeing her. This is dangerous territory. You quickly shift your attention to a nearby bookshelf, studying it with the exaggerated interest of someone who has never seen a book before. Victorians treat their eyes like delicate instruments, used sparingly and never without purpose. They believe the gaze reveals secrets that words conceal. Eye contact becomes a language of its own, spoken softly and understood instantly. You realize they can hold entire conversations with a lift of the lash or a fleeting glance, while you stumble through each moment like a tourist who missed the translation guide. Finally, after hours of practice and several near disasters, you begin to find a rhythm. You look up sparingly. You let your eyes drift naturally without locking on to anyone for too long. You smile with your gaze instead of your mouth, just enough to seem pleasant but not enough to start a rumor. And in that quiet dance of glances, you understand something important. Survival here requires not only silence and posture, but mastery of the invisible threads woven between every pair of eyes. One misplaced look can shift your entire place within the room. So you keep your gaze soft, your movements subtle, and your attention steady. In a world where even the smallest glance carries weight, you learn to navigate each moment with care, grateful each time you escape without accidentally proposing to someone or starting a scandal before tea. You step into the Victorian world of mourning and instantly feel as though you have wandered into a society where grief is not an emotion but a full-time occupation. Everything around you is draped in black, from doorways to dress hems, and the air carries the solemn weight of expectations. Mourning here is not private reflection, it is a public declaration, as intricate and regulated as any royal ceremony. You notice immediately that people wear sorrow the way they wear clothing, carefully measured, meticulously maintained, and judged by everyone who sees it. A woman passes you in a mourning bonnet so large it could double as a small tent. Her veil covers most of her face, giving her an air of mystery and mild intimidation. She does not simply walk. She glides with the slow gravity of someone carrying generations of etiquette on her shoulders. You watch her with curiosity until she pauses beside a shop window. The shopkeeper rushes forward, rearranging items as though her sorrow itself is a customer. You realize Victorians treat mourning like a sacred social duty, something that demands respect, silence, and an extraordinary amount of fabric. You turn a corner and find yourself in a neighborhood where every door sports a black wreath. Even the windows look dimmer, as though instructed to sympathize. A man wearing a dark armband steps out of a house and nods at passers-by with a seriousness that makes you straighten your posture. His expression suggests that the mere act of being seen while grieving requires discipline. You cannot help noticing he moves at a slower pace, as though speed might imply he has recovered too quickly and is therefore morally questionable. The rules emerge slowly, piece by piece, as you observe. Mourning has stages, each with its own dress code. The first stage demands deep black clothing, absolutely no ornamentation, and a demeanor that suggests you are communing with sorrow itself. The second stage allows for slight adjustments, maybe a touch of gray or a subdued accessory, but joy must still be kept at bay. Only in the final stage can you begin to adopt more color, but even then it must whisper rather than shout. Victorians treat color like emotional noise. Too much too soon, and you risk being judged as heartless. You enter a parlor draped in heavy curtains, where a group of women sit in somber silence, their hands folded neatly. They do not speak unless spoken to, and when they do, their voices carry the softness of falling ashes. A table nearby holds memorial cards with elegant borders, each one announcing the departed with more flourish than many living people receive. You pick one up and realize it includes poetry, symbolism, and details of virtue. Victorians do not simply mourn a person, they rebuild them into an ideal. A widow sits near the fireplace, her posture straight, her gaze distant. You notice her dress is more elaborate than the others, layers of black silk and crepe forming a careful architecture of sorrow. Her hands rest delicately in her lap. The room orbits around her grief, offering her space while also watching closely to ensure she follows the rules. You wonder how anyone mourns authentically under such scrutiny. Then again, the Victorians believe structure helps guide the heart through turbulent emotion. The rituals keep chaos at bay. You make the mistake of smiling politely at someone across the room. The reaction is immediate. They stare at you with the kind of quiet shock reserved for people who dance during funerals. You quickly adjust your expression into something more somber, though you are not entirely sure what that should look like. A subdued melancholy, perhaps. Something contemplative but not dramatic. Sitting here, you realize even your face must obey the rules. As you leave the house, you notice the street is filled with carriages draped in black cloth, horses adorned with feathers that sway mournfully in the breeze. You watch as a funeral procession moves slowly through the fog, each participant walking with ritualized precision. This is not simply farewell. It is performance, symbol, and obligation intertwined. Victorian mourning turns grief into a lifestyle because it offers shape to the shapeless. Loss becomes something visible, structured, and shared. You begin to understand the comfort in that. Even if the rules feel overwhelming, the rituals create a world where sorrow has a place to live, where memories are preserved through fabric, posture, and silence. You step back into the bustling street, surrounded by the living and the grieving, realizing that here mourning does not simply end, it transforms, and in its transformation, it reshapes the world around you. You find yourself walking toward a Victorian funeral with the same nervous caution you would use while approaching a sleeping predator. Everything around you feels heightened, sharpened, and oddly theatrical. The mourners gather in a slow-moving current of black fabric, each step deliberate, each expression carefully arranged. The atmosphere is thick with solemnity, but beneath it lies something else, something close to fear. You sense it the moment you join the edge of the crowd. Victorians treat funerals with reverence, but they also treat them with the intensity of people who know one wrong move might follow them for years. You realize quickly that clothing is not just attire here. It is a declaration of allegiance to grief itself. The dominant color is black, so rich and heavy it absorbs the light. Some people wear shades so deep they look like walking silhouettes, while others wear fabrics chosen specifically for how they rustle, as if sorrow needs sound effects. You glance down at your own outfit, relieved to see you are sufficiently somber, though you cannot escape the sinking feeling that you may have misjudged the tone. The Victorians notice everything, including the exact darkness of your sleeves. A woman near you adjusts her veil, and you notice she is being watched by at least 3 other attendees, each evaluating whether the length, placement, and fabric align with the unwritten codes of mourning. Her fingers tremble slightly. You do not blame her. Wearing the wrong color at a funeral can brand you as thoughtless, insensitive, or morally defective. Some people never recover socially. You overhear 2 older ladies whispering about a cousin who once wore a muted brown to a funeral and was treated with polite frost for an entire season. They speak of her as if she committed a crime against humanity. The ceremony begins, and you follow the procession as it winds toward the church. The mourners stay in formation, bodies angled with a discipline that feels trained rather than instinctive. You notice how carefully they avoid stepping ahead of the immediate family. Cutting in front would be a catastrophic breach of etiquette, equivalent to declaring yourself the main character of someone else's tragedy. You adjust your pace, letting the gravity of the crowd pull you along, careful not to drift too near the front. Inside the church, the atmosphere thickens. Candles flicker, shadows dance across wooden pews, and the organ hums a low, somber note that settles into your spine. The mourners take their seats with precision, each person folding into place like pieces in a sorrowful puzzle. You sit at the very end of a pew, hoping this is the safest position for someone still learning the rules. When you look up, you see a row of women wearing jet black jewelry that gleams faintly. Mourning jewelry is its own coded message, crafted from materials that announce devotion, memory, and restraint. A single glint of gold would be scandalous. As the service continues, you become aware of another layer of expectation. Facial expressions must be subdued but sincere. Tears are acceptable, but only if they fall gracefully. Loud crying risks disrupting the ceremony. Smiling is unthinkable. Your face settles into an expression of gentle solemnity, the kind that requires more concentration than you expected. You hear a muffled cough behind you and notice several people turn with alarm. Even bodily sounds must obey etiquette here. When the service ends, everyone moves in a quiet stream toward the graveyard, where the final rites take place beneath a gray sky. The mourners stand in perfect rows, and you do your best to match their posture. A breeze lifts the edges of veils and cloaks, and you notice again how uniform everything is. The sea of black creates a shared identity. Anyone wearing an incorrect color would stand out like a torch in a library. You imagine the horror if someone arrived in pale blue or, worse, something cheerful. The idea alone feels forbidden. As the coffin is lowered, the mourners bow their heads in collective silence. You feel the weight of tradition pressing in from every side. Victorian funerals are not simply farewells. They are reaffirmations of communal values, demonstrations of respect, and tests of loyalty to the unspoken laws of propriety. The clothing, the posture, the pacing, the silence, all of it forms a ritual that keeps chaos at a careful distance. You watch as attendees place flowers at the graveside, each motion soft and intentional. When it is your turn, you mimic their movements as best you can, offering a quiet nod that seems appropriate. No one gasps. No one glares. You blend into the stream of dark figures moving back toward the road. As you step away, you finally understand why wearing the wrong color feels dangerous. In this world, grief is public, visible, and fiercely protected. Mourning has rules because emotion is supposed to have structure. Clothing becomes a promise, a symbol, a shield. One false shade, one careless brightness, and the illusion breaks. You walk on, feeling the lingering echo of the ceremony settle around you like a soft black veil of its own. You step into the Victorian world of hygiene with the confidence of someone who has washed their hands at least twice today, which already makes you a suspiciously modern creature. The era greets you with a thick fog of coal smoke, horse fumes, and the faint sweetness of soap that is trying its best but losing the battle. You quickly learn that the Victorians treat cleanliness as an act of moral performance, not science. Germs, after all, are still an unproven rumor, whispered by medical eccentrics who keep ruining dinner parties by talking about invisible creatures living on skin. You walk down a crowded London street and watch as a woman carefully lifts her dress hem to avoid touching the pavement. The gesture looks elegant until you realize she is trying not to bring home any microorganisms which she does not believe exist, but fears anyway. Hygiene here is an intricate dance, built on the shaky foundation of superstition, instinct, and whatever advice the neighborhood physician scribbled while dozing off. People follow cleanliness rules not because they understand them, but because someone respectable once insisted they were vital. You catch yourself holding your breath as a cart rolls by carrying piles of waste that probably belonged somewhere far from human noses. The first rule you encounter is about washing. Victorians do wash, though not often enough for your modern sensibilities. A full bath is reserved for moments of necessity, moral purification, or medical emergency. You step into the hallway of a boarding house and see a group of tenants gathered around a basin as though it contains secrets of the universe. A woman dips her fingers in briefly, then pats her face with the delicacy of someone afraid the water might faint. Another man rubs a cloth behind his ears, as if that alone will keep him from illness. They all share the same bowl, which you quickly step away from before it becomes your turn. Inside the home, you discover that hygiene rules dictate everything from how one handles laundry to how one vents a room. Women shake rugs out of windows with the seriousness of ritual, sending plumes of dust into the street. People air out sheets because it feels cleansing, even though the air itself is teeming with everything they hope to avoid. You see a maid wearing an apron and an expression of determination as she opens windows to let in the breeze. The breeze enters with the enthusiasm of a stray cat and brings with it half the city. No one seems bothered. Fresh air is believed to cure nearly anything, even ailments caused by fresh air. You pass a doctor who declares loudly that illness travels through bad smells. People lean away from unpleasant odors as if dodging bullets. Perfume becomes a form of armor, and handkerchiefs scented with lavender are pressed to faces with the dedication of a religious ceremony. You do the same out of self-preservation, mostly because a nearby sewer vent suddenly burps up a reminder of why cholera thrives. Victorian hygiene rules are less about eliminating danger and more about creating a hopeful buffer between yourself and the unpleasant truth that the world is larger, dirtier, and more unpredictable than anyone is prepared for. Public behavior follows its own strange etiquette. Spitting is discouraged but happens everywhere because men still carry pocket spittoons like fashion accessories. Children track mud indoors with cheerful abandon, leaving footprints that maids erase with resigned precision. Soap appears in shapes and scents designed to imply luxury, though half of it smells faintly medicinal. You sample a bar and immediately understand why people think it can cure anything. It smells like determination and crushed herbs. As you venture deeper into the city, the rules grow stranger. You watch a woman scrub her front steps with such fervor that you wonder whether her soul depends on it. Public cleanliness reflects private virtue. A dirty doorstep suggests a dirty life. You nod solemnly at your own reflection in a shop window, silently promising to keep your hypothetical Victorian doorstep spotless. You sense the eyes of neighbors on you, even before they actually appear. Everyone here monitors each other's habits, as if health depends on collective vigilance. Soon you find yourself at a public bathhouse, where the air is thick with steam and whispered complaints. Bathing schedules are posted like train timetables, and people file in with towels clutched to their chests as if entering a confessional. You step inside cautiously, half expecting someone to scold you for breathing incorrectly. Men soap themselves with brisk efficiency, while women wash behind curtains, exchanging gossip that sounds far more dangerous than any germ. The water looks questionable after a few rounds, but no one seems worried. Cleanliness, after all, is partly symbolic. When you exit back onto the street, the city greets you with another gust of smoky wind, and you realize the Victorian hygiene rules are not just guidelines. They are defensive spells cast against a world that feels perpetually poised to strike. You tighten your cloak, lift your chin, and try to look properly vigilant. In a society where illness hides in plain sight and no one can see the enemy they fear, cleanliness becomes a ritual of hope, a way to insist that survival is possible even without understanding the danger. You begin to notice that every Victorian you encounter seems to be performing a role, as if they were all cast in a grand tragedy about illness, prevention, and the mysterious forces lurking in the air. You try to blend in, though you feel like an understudy who skipped rehearsals. The Victorians glide through their daily routines with gestures so ceremonious, you wonder if they were choreographed by a slightly anxious stage director. Yet each movement holds purpose. Every sniff, sigh, and turn of the wrist hides a small act of self-preservation. You learn quickly that avoiding disease here is less about science and more about performance. The first ritual you witness involves a man dramatically pausing before entering a crowded shop. He pulls a scented handkerchief from his pocket with the flourish of a magician revealing a dove. With a practiced motion, he lifts it to his nose, inhales deeply, and steps inside as if walking into battle. You follow, but your handkerchief is unperfumed, leaving you vulnerable to the smells Victorians believe could carry illness. The air inside is dense with spices and human breath. The man stands proudly with his lavender shield, while you consider adopting the same technique before someone mistakes you for a hazard. Walking through the streets, you see small rituals everywhere. Women carry tiny bottles of smelling salts and hold them to their noses when passing questionable alleyways, which is most of the city. Others dab perfume at the base of their gloves to create a scented barrier against invisible threats. Men tap their boots before entering homes to shake off misfortune, dust, and whatever creatures they imagine cling to the soles of their shoes. Even the horses seem aware of the daily drama, tossing their heads as if participating in the grand production. You begin to practice these rituals yourself. You pinch your sleeves neatly when passing strangers, creating a symbolic shield against accidental contact. You angle your body away from coughing children, which earns approving nods from nearby matrons. You adopt a careful breathing pattern, shallow and discreet, designed to minimize the intake of untrustworthy air without fainting. The Victorians would admire your adaptability. At tea gatherings, the theatricality becomes more refined. You watch as guests wave their hands gently over steaming cups, allowing the warmth to cleanse their faces, or so they claim. Steam is believed to purify the air, and the sight of well-dressed individuals leaning meaningfully into teacups feels like witnessing a ceremony of polite desperation. You try it yourself, and someone compliments you on your awareness of healthful habits, which you take as a rare victory. The rituals intensify when illness strikes a neighborhood. Curtains drop across windows like funeral veils. Doorways are sprinkled with vinegar, dripped in tidy lines that sparkle suspiciously in the sunlight. Families burn herbs in small bowls, sending trails of smoke curling into hallways with a solemn determination, as though the smoke carries protective prayers. You walk through one such corridor and find yourself enveloped in a haze of rosemary and desperation. It makes your eyes water, but everyone around you looks relieved. Then there are the public displays of caution that border on theatrical art. A woman on the street lifts her parasol, not for shade, but to shield her from a man coughing several steps away. She pivots smoothly, turning the parasol into a barrier. You admire the elegance even as you sense the fear beneath it. Another pedestrian crosses to the opposite side of the road with exaggerated politeness, bowing slightly in apology before fleeing. No one blames him. The Victorians prefer distance when danger threatens. Inside parlors, conversations about disease are whispered with the gravity of state secrets. People recount stories of neighbors who fell ill after shaking hands, or of entire households afflicted because someone allowed a draft through the door. Everyone nods somberly, reinforcing the belief that illness lurks in every careless gesture. You sit with your hands folded, listening closely, learning which rituals are harmless and which might save you from the worst fate of all. becoming the subject of whispered gossip about poor hygiene. Before long, the rituals become second nature. You find yourself stepping lightly around puddles, convinced they harbor unseen threats. You open windows strategically to avoid drafts that might carry misfortune. You perfect the art of cleansing the air with a precise flick of your handkerchief. It is all ceremony, but the Victorians believe in it with unwavering commitment. By the time night falls, you realize that you have mastered something essential. The gestures, the scents, the carefully timed movements all form a protective choreography. In this era of uncertain science and heightened fear, survival is a performance, and every person is both actor and audience. You join them with grace, letting each ritual settle into your routine as naturally as breath itself. You walk through a Victorian street with a growing awareness that the air itself is considered a villain. Every breeze feels like it arrives with a warning label. The people around you move with the vigilance of soldiers navigating a battlefield, except the enemy here is foul air, bad smells, and a list of imaginary dangers that seem to multiply each time you blink. You try to look casual, even though you are beginning to suspect the atmosphere might collapse upon you if you breathe incorrectly. Victorians do not joke about bad air. They treat it the way modern people treat taxes: inevitable, invisible, and blamed for nearly everything. You notice a gentleman ahead of you raising a scented handkerchief toward his face. He presses it gently to his nose as though whispering a secret to it, then walks on with renewed confidence. His expression suggests he has outwitted the air. A woman follows suit, lifting a small vial of something floral and sniffing it with dramatic intensity. You feel strangely underdressed without a perfumed object to shield yourself from hazards that may or may not exist. The Victorians have turned smell into science. If it stinks, it kills. If it smells pleasant, it heals. You turn a corner and encounter a row of houses fitted with oddly shaped vents that resemble the noses of startled animals. They protrude from the walls and point downward as if ashamed of themselves. These contraptions were designed to encourage airflow without inviting evil vapors. The residents trust them deeply. A passing man pats one of the vents as if greeting a loyal dog, then nods to himself with satisfaction. You realize that ventilation here is not simply a matter of comfort. It is a crusade. Inside a parlor, you watch as a group of visitors participates in a ritual that appears almost ceremonial. Someone opens a window exactly 3 inches, no more, no less, to allow the good air in while keeping the sinister air out. The window is then secured with a decorative stopper shaped like a cherub, whose cheerful expression hides the weight of the responsibility now resting on its small plaster shoulders. The guests comment on how refreshing the air feels, though it is identical to the air outside, unless you count the scent of lavender drifting from the room itself. Perfume becomes another line of defense. People sprinkle rose water on handkerchiefs with the precision of chemists. A woman waves a lace fan infused with citrus oil, creating a protective breeze around her face. You copy her technique and receive a polite nod of approval. In Victorian society, even imaginary dangers demand real manners. You feel the perfumed air sweep across your skin and wonder if the scent does anything scientifically meaningful or if it simply convinces your instincts that the world is less threatening. On the street, the fear of foul air takes on architectural form. You pass public buildings proudly adorned with tall chimneys that pump out smoke, which is believed to rise harmlessly into the sky instead of seeping into lungs. City planners have crafted entire neighborhoods to maximize airflow. Certain streets widen without warning, not for beauty but to prevent illness from settling like fog. The air must move. Stagnation is the enemy. You begin to walk briskly, imagining that if you stroll too slowly, you might offend an invisible Victorian health inspector. Children chant warnings about foul air while skipping rope. They sing that lingering near swamps invites doom. A nursemaid yanks a little boy away from a puddle, declaring that standing water breeds misfortune. You look at the puddle, which seems entirely innocent, but you step around it anyway. Their conviction is contagious. They may not understand germs, but they understand danger in the poetic, improvised way societies do before science catches up. Even in private moments, the fear persists. At bedtime, families place bowls of vinegar on nightstands to purify the air. Mothers sprinkle herbs near cradles to keep imaginary creatures from stealing children's breath. You sit in a lamplit room and watch a man arrange eucalyptus leaves on a mantel with somber dedication. He explains that these leaves repel bad vapors and cowardly spirits. You nod respectfully, though you cannot decide which he fears more. As you lie beneath a heavy quilt later, you hear the city breathing. Chimneys exhale smoke. Windows creak open and shut. Neighbors whisper warnings about the night air, which they believe roams with malicious intent. You take one last look around the dim room and realize the truth. The Victorians fear what they cannot see, so they create rituals to tame the unknown. The air becomes manageable when scented, stirred, inspected, and disciplined. In a world full of mysteries, they build small, fragrant fortresses around themselves and hope the dangers, real or imagined, stay outside. You step into a Victorian dining room and immediately realize you have entered a battlefield disguised as a meal. The chandeliers glow softly, the table stretches longer than some modern apartments, and each place setting is armed with enough cutlery to perform minor surgery. You take your seat cautiously, feeling the eyes of strangers glide toward you with the polite scrutiny of predators pretending they are herbivores. Every utensil gleams with expectation. You have not even touched anything yet, and already the forks appear disappointed in you. The first rule becomes obvious when the servants bring out the soup. No one moves too quickly. Eating here is less about nourishment and more about performing civility at a level that borders on athletic. You lift your spoon and try mimicking the motions around you. People dip their spoons delicately, sipping from the side as if the bowl might burst into flames if handled incorrectly. You accidentally scoop forward instead of away, and a woman across the table raises one eyebrow in a gesture so tiny it could be classified as an accusation. You correct your technique, hoping no one else noticed your moment of recklessness. Conversation begins, and you realize even speaking is governed by invisible threads of etiquette. No topic too heavy, no laughter too loud, no enthusiasm allowed unless filtered through several layers of restraint. You try to comment on the food, but your words come out slightly too sincere, causing the gentleman beside you to blink with mild alarm. You adjust by speaking in softer tones, adding a touch of abstraction, as if you are complimenting a memory rather than the roast in front of you. Then comes the salad course, delivered like a polite threat. More forks appear. You pick the one nearest the plate, only to see your neighbor selecting a different one with the confidence of someone who has been practicing for decades. You place your fork down quietly and switch to match her. She nods approvingly, and you feel a warmth of triumph that is wildly disproportionate to the accomplishment. Each utensil feels like a riddle. Pick wrong, and you risk social collapse. Pick right, and you earn silent praise from people who would never admit they care. As the meal progresses, you begin to adapt. You sit straighter, breathe slower, and handle your knife with the solemnity of a monk adjusting a sacred relic. The room remains a theater of restraint. Napkins are dabbed, never wiped. Bread is broken, not bitten. A man coughs once, discreetly, and everyone pauses as though he may have violated some unwritten code. He survives the moment with dignity, though you catch him looking faintly shaken. When the main course arrives, the pressure escalates. A large piece of meat sits before you, begging to be conquered, yet every motion must be subtle. You imitate the cutting technique of the woman across from you, who seems to glide through her meal as if playing an instrument rather than eating. Her wrists move with careful precision, guiding each bite to her lips without a single clink of cutlery. She is a dining virtuoso. You are a well-meaning beginner attempting to blend in with the orchestra. The host begins a new topic, and you nod along with thoughtful expressions despite not fully understanding what is being discussed. The conversation floats gracefully over politics, poetry, and travel, weaving around anything too emotional or too deliciously dramatic. You feel the urge to contribute something bold, but swallow it quickly, remembering this is not the place for spontaneous honesty. People here admire elegance, not passion. Dessert arrives, and the table relaxes slightly. Small pastries appear, arranged so beautifully you hesitate before taking one. The fork is tiny, adorable, and intimidating. You eat slowly, savoring the quiet applause of flavor while pretending the utensil rules no longer haunt you. The room softens as people indulge their sweet tooth with discreet joy. Even the strictest guest seems to loosen by a hair's breadth. When the final course concludes, everyone rises with deliberate grace. You follow, feeling as though you have completed a ceremonial trial. The forks no longer glare. You survived. As you step away from the table, you realize the truth. Victorian dining is not simply nourishment. It is performance, identity, and social survival woven together under candlelight. And tonight, you played your part well enough to leave the room with your dignity intact. You step into the Victorian parlor expecting a peaceful cup of tea and quickly realize you have entered a social minefield. The room glows with soft afternoon light. Lace curtains sway gently, and a porcelain tea set rests on a low table like a collection of fragile expectations. Tea time is not a break in the day. It is a ritual, a quiet test of character disguised as a warm beverage. Every gesture has rules. Every sip carries meaning. You take a breath and steady yourself, praying you will not shatter anything, literally or metaphorically. The hostess moves first, lifting the teapot with the poise of someone handling a sacred relic. Steam curls upward in delicate ribbons. She pours without a single drop spilling, and the guests observe this with reverence. You watch closely, trying to memorize her technique before your turn arrives. You notice that she tilts the pot gently, her wrist steady, her elbow tucked. You copy the motion in the air with your own invisible teapot, earning a suspicious glance from a gentleman who clearly thinks you are warming up for trouble. A saucer is placed before you, followed by a cup so thin you fear it might snap under the weight of your own anxiety. You wait for instructions, but none come. Victorians expect you to know what to do. You remind yourself that you have observed enough social rituals by now to piece together a strategy. When the hostess offers sugar, you accept the smallest amount possible. 2 cubes would declare you frivolous. 1 cube feels safe. Milk follows, poured in a circular motion that the Victorians insist creates harmony in the cup, though you suspect it is simply tradition reinforced over too many generations to challenge. Then comes the matter of stirring. In your world, this is a mindless action. In the Victorian world, it is a diplomatic performance. You must stir quietly, gracefully, and without clinking the spoon against the sides of the cup. The sound of metal on porcelain is considered chaotic, almost rebellious. You stir with exaggerated caution, creating a silent whirlpool. The spoon rests on the saucer when you finish, never left in the cup unless you intend to be talked about for the rest of the week. You attempt your first sip. The entire room seems to hold its breath. You lift the cup by the handle, never by the bowl, and bring it toward your lips without raising your pinky finger. The infamous pinky lift is a myth, a gesture Victorians associate with pretension. You keep your hand steady, hoping the room will not mistake concentration for melodrama. When the tea touches your tongue, it tastes faintly floral, warm, and victorious. You lower the cup without incident, earning a subtle nod from a woman across the room who has been studying you like an examiner at a final exam. Conversation joins the ritual. People discuss weather, correspondence, travel plans, and mild philosophical observations. Avoiding anything that might demand passion, you join in cautiously, offering a comment about the pleasant breeze today. A man near the window agrees in such a restrained tone that you wonder if he dislikes the breeze entirely but is too polite to challenge your statement. Tea time is a balancing act between honesty and civility. Strong opinions are left at the door. At one point, laughter breaks out softly among a small group near the fireplace, but even the laughter seems curated, trimmed of any excess joy. You add a gentle smile to show that you, too, appreciate the amusing anecdote you barely heard. The goal is to appear present without crossing into the dangerous territory of enthusiasm. A plate of small pastries passes your way. You select one with cautious precision, mindful that choosing the largest might label you indulgent, while choosing none might suggest disdain for the hostess. You break the pastry into tiny, manageable bites, eating as quietly as possible. Every crumb that lands safely on the plate feels like a personal triumph. Every sip of tea becomes an extension of your dignity. The ritual continues in waves of conversation, refined gestures, and elegant stillness. Slowly you begin to relax, realizing you are no longer the outsider fumbling through etiquette. You are participating, blending into the rhythm of the room. The guests seem calmer around you now, no longer watching for disaster. When the hostess finally sets the teapot down for the last time, the ritual dissolves gently. Cups empty, saucers settle, and the room exhales. You rise from your seat with the quiet assurance of someone who has passed an unspoken test. You survive tea time without starting a scandal, and as you step toward the door, you carry with you the peculiar pride that comes from mastering yet another Victorian ritual that pretends to be simple but demands absolute precision. You enter the Victorian world of courtship expecting shyness and stolen glances, but what you find instead is a system so elaborate it could run a small government. Every gesture is encoded, every word sharpened into subtext, and every interaction supervised by people who pretend they are not watching while watching intently. Courtship here is less about romance and more about preventing the entire social order from collapsing under the weight of unregulated emotions. You stand at the edge of the parlor, trying not to breathe too loudly, observing a dance of restraint so intricate it makes your spine tighten in sympathy. A young woman sits with perfect posture near the fireplace, hands folded like a statue contemplating virtue. Across the room, a gentleman pretends to study a bookshelf while actually studying her. They do not speak. They do not approach. Instead, they exchange the tiniest shifts of the eyes, each movement a message. You try to decipher the code. A glance downward might signal interest. A glance upward might signal disinterest. A glance to the side might signal the presence of a chaperone who threatens to materialize between them like a supernatural force of propriety. Courtship is a battlefield, and their weapons are eyelids. A chaperone stands nearby, a woman with the serene expression of someone who has mastered both etiquette and intimidation. She observes the room as though she can detect improper thoughts before they turn into actions. You watch her glide closer to the pair, her movement graceful yet purposeful. The gentleman immediately adjusts his stance, transforming from potential suitor to innocent guest, examining the spines of books he will never read. The young woman becomes even more still, somehow managing to look both composed and disappointed at once. You learn quickly that conversation is heavily regulated. A gentleman may ask a lady about the weather, literature, or music, but never anything that suggests personal desire. You witness a man attempt to compliment a woman's voice, only to have her aunt intercept with the ferocity of a guard dog. He recalibrates and instead compliments the piano's craftsmanship. The aunt nods approvingly. The woman hides a smile. You begin to understand how gossip thrives in this society. With so many restrictions, every harmless comment becomes ripe for interpretation. The ritual extends beyond conversation. Calling cards serve as invitations and announcements of interest. You watch a gentleman agonize over where to place his card on a silver tray. Too far forward, and it implies boldness. Too far back, and it implies self-doubt. He chooses the center, steps away, and looks at it with the expression of someone hoping fate favors moderation today. When the household maid collects the cards, she examines each one with the smug authority of someone who knows exactly how quickly news will travel. Walking in public together is a privilege that must be earned. You witness a young couple take their first supervised stroll along a garden path, accompanied by a chaperone who trails behind them at the exact distance required to prevent impropriety while still allowing conversation. The couple walks with the stiff caution of people navigating a tightrope. They speak of flowers instead of feelings. And each time their hands drift even slightly closer, They both recoil as if struck by an electric current of etiquette. Meanwhile, gossip swirls around the edges of the scene. A cluster of women whisper behind fans, dissecting every detail of the courtship attempts unfolding before them. They debate whether the gentleman with the calling card hesitated too long, or whether the young woman at the fireplace blinked in a way that suggested romantic turmoil. Their voices remain low, polite, and devastatingly accurate. In this era, gossip is both entertainment and social currency. You sense that a single, misplaced gesture could fuel an entire week of discussion. As the day progresses, you begin to appreciate the strange balancing act the Victorians perform. Their elaborate rules are designed to protect reputations, maintain order, and prevent heartbreak from erupting into chaos. Yet the same rules ensure that every quiet moment of connection feels monumental. A shared smile becomes a secret. A conversation becomes a victory. A stroll becomes a promise. When evening falls and the lamps glow softly, you watch the final interactions play out. A gentleman offers a polite farewell to the woman he has been admiring all afternoon. She responds with a measured nod that somehow communicates interest without crossing any lines. The chaperone approves. The whispering women lean in. The air hums with restrained emotion. You leave the parlor with the sense that you have witnessed a world where romance exists in the margins, where chaos is prevented by rules so strict they become their own kind of drama. And yet, amidst the restraint, the feelings remain unmistakably human, glowing quietly beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to step into the light. You learn the truth about Victorian letters the moment you watch someone compose one. It is not writing, it is choreography, a delicate, handwritten ballet performed with ink that smells faintly of iron and seriousness. You sit across from a young woman at a writing desk as she contemplates a blank sheet of paper with the concentration of a scientist preparing to mix unstable chemicals. She lifts her pen, hesitates, lowers it again, and sighs softly. You begin to understand that the letter itself is not the message. The emotion lies in the spacing, the flourishes, the restraint. Every stroke is weighted with intention. She finally begins. The greeting is formal, careful, and impossibly polite. You lean forward, expecting her to continue, but she stops again. The salutation must align perfectly with the significance of the relationship. Too warm and she risks impropriety. Too cold and she risks insult. She experiments with a phrase, scratches it out, tries another, scratches again. Each strike of the pen feels like a tiny tragedy. You watch her wrestle with 2 sentences for the better part of 10 minutes before moving on. Victorians pour more thought into a single comma than some people pour into their entire romantic lives. As she writes, you notice how controlled her handwriting is. Not too large, not too small. Each letter looping gracefully in a practiced rhythm. Even handwriting is a social indicator. Slanted too far left, and it suggests melancholy. Slanted too far right, and it suggests impulsiveness. You realize your own handwriting from the modern world would label you either chaotic or unserious. Victorian letters must prove your mind is composed, your emotions balanced, and your intentions pure. A gentleman across the room works on his own letter, pausing occasionally to tap the tip of his pen against his chin. He chooses his words with the same care one might choose an heirloom or a confession. He writes a line, then reads it aloud under his breath, gauging whether it communicates affection without daring to sound eager. He folds his paper, unfolds it, and rewrites the entire paragraph. In this world, sending a poorly phrased letter is social treason. You learn that the length of a letter matters just as much as the content. Too long, and you seem burdensome or overly emotional. Too short, and you seem indifferent. You watch the woman measure her paragraphs visually, spacing each one evenly, as though building a tiny architectural masterpiece. Even the margins must be aesthetically restrained. You suspect she would rather create a new sheet of paper from scratch than allow a crooked line to exist. When it comes time to express sentiment, the choreography becomes even more precise. A gentle hint of longing must be tucked between polite observations about weather or family health. Emotions cannot be named outright. They must be implied, folded into phrases like, "I trust this letter finds you well," or "I remain ever your humble friend." You read over her shoulder and try to decipher the hidden meaning under each sentence. It feels like discovering secret messages written in the pauses between words. Sealing the letter is its own ritual. Wax is melted and dripped onto the fold with the solemnity of a sacred vow. The seal imprint must be clear, neither smudged nor too deeply pressed. The woman holds her breath as she stamps it, and when she lifts the seal cleanly, she relaxes with the satisfaction of someone who has successfully completed an emotional pilgrimage. The gentleman across the room does the same, though he adds a faint flourish to the edge of his envelope, a detail so subtle it could be decoded only by someone equally trained in the art. Even delivery carries unspoken meaning. A letter sent too quickly suggests impatience. One sent too slowly suggests waning interest. You watch a stack of letters placed on a silver tray, each arranged by social importance. The sorting process is meticulous, almost reverent. Letters are small ambassadors of the soul, and mishandling them invites misunderstanding or, worse, scandal. By the time you see the final letter carried away by a footman, you understand why this ritual matters so deeply. In a society where emotions must be disguised, diluted, and politely tucked into written form, letters become the one place people can speak honestly, even if honesty is encoded in metaphor. The choreography protects them. It allows vulnerability without surrender, affection without exposure, and connection without chaos. You step back from the writing desk, feeling as though you have witnessed something intimate and ancient. In the Victorian world, a letter is not just ink on paper. It is the quiet, trembling space between what people feel and what they dare to say. You begin to understand Victorian household rules the moment you step inside a modest home and watch an ordinary chore unfold with theatrical gravity. A maid stands before a fireplace armed with a brush, a cloth, and what appears to be determination forged from ancestral suffering. She moves with urgency, not because the task is dramatic, but because everything in a Victorian household operates on the belief that chaos lurks behind every mote of dust. You quickly realize chores are not chores. They are survival quests, dressed in aprons and lace. The mistress of the house glides through the parlor with an expression of mild tension, the kind of look people wear when expecting company or witnessing the collapse of civilization. She pauses beside a table, lifts a doily, inspects it for imperfections invisible to mortal eyes, then replaces it with the precision of a general arranging troops. Her movements are silent but full of meaning. Dust signifies moral failing. Disorder suggests spiritual confusion. A scuffed floor hints at the downfall of the family. You walk carefully, quietly, feeling judged by every polished surface. In the kitchen, you discover an entirely different realm of labor. Pots simmer, kettles hiss, and the cook orchestrates the chaos with rapid commands. Cleaning vegetables must be done according to rules of purity and propriety. Washing them incorrectly, you are told, invites sickness. Washing them too correctly invites accusation that you are wasting water. You find yourself hovering near the wash basin, afraid to even touch a carrot. The cook narrows her eyes at you, sensing weakness. She can spot hesitation the way hawks spot prey. Upstairs, another maid is battling the bed linens, shaking out sheets with the energy of someone trying to exercise spirits. Bedding must be aired daily, even in winter, because fresh air is believed to preserve health and moral clarity. She opens a window, letting in a gust of cold wind that nearly sweeps you backward. The sheets billow like sails. She looks satisfied. You wrap your cloak tighter, questioning your place in this world where fabric seems more powerful than people. Laundry day is its own epic. Clothes are scrubbed, soaked, boiled, beaten, rinsed, wrung, and pinned with a choreography so exact it defies description. You watch women attack stains as though confronting old grudges. Soap bubbles rise like small ghosts. A single shirt passes through enough stages to qualify for enlightenment. You try lifting a damp sheet and immediately regret it as the weight drags you forward like a clinging sea creature. The other workers show no sympathy. They are veterans. You are a spectator. Floors demand their own rituals. Sweeping is not simply removing debris. It is sweeping with direction, intention, and silent precision. Sweeping toward the door implies you wish the household luck. Sweeping toward the hearth implies something far more dramatic, which no one will explain to you directly. A maid warns you not to sweep around someone's feet unless you wish to curse their marriage prospects. You nod solemnly and retreat from the broom. The household rules extend to the objects themselves. Lamps must be trimmed just so, with wicks cut at an angle sharp enough to impress a jeweler. Silver must be polished until your reflection looks like a faint accusation. China must be stored with mathematical symmetry. Even rugs have placement rules, some of which revolve around preventing drafts and others around preventing misfortune. You learn that the rug by the front door must lie perfectly straight, or guests will assume the household is unstable in spirit. Meals turn chores into acrobatics. Table setting requires counting forks, aligning plates, and maintaining distance between objects as if measuring gravitational forces. The servants work like an orchestra. The mistress inspects everything, occasionally making adjustments so slight you cannot see them, only sense the relief in her shoulders afterward. Perfection is not a goal, it is a daily obligation. By the time evening arrives, you have watched enough household rituals to appreciate the stamina required to survive them. The chores never end. They simply rotate in careful cycles, each one infused with fear, pride, superstition, and a strange sense of purpose. You begin to understand why Victorians cling to these rules. The world outside is unpredictable. Illness haunts the air, and society judges every breath. But inside the home, order can be crafted. Cleanliness becomes protection. Routine becomes armor. You lie down at the end of the day, exhausted simply from observing. The household settles into quiet, though you know each person is preparing for the next battle at dawn. Chores here are not mundane. They are victories carved from dust and discipline. And as your eyes close, you find yourself admiring the resilience it takes to keep a Victorian home standing, polished and unscandalized, one survival quest at a time. You learn the Victorian relationship with fashion the moment you watch someone get dressed. It begins peacefully enough, with soft fabrics folded neatly on a bed, but the tranquility dissolves as soon as layering begins. Clothing in this century is not meant for comfort. It is a public declaration of discipline, endurance, and the ability to survive daily life while wrapped in minor torture devices. You stand beside a wardrobe and try not to gape as a maid fastens the first of many ties, laces, and hooks on her mistress. The process looks like preparing armor, except the enemy is not war but society itself. The corset is the first shock. You see it hanging on a chair, innocent as a ribbon, until it is tightened. The maid pulls the laces with a steady rhythm, reducing the woman's waist with the confidence of someone who does this more often than breathing. The mistress exhales softly, which is the most rebellion she allows herself. When the corset settles into place, her posture becomes impossibly straight, as if discomfort could shape the human spine into nobility. You instinctively straighten your own back in sympathy, surprised you can still draw breath freely. Layers accumulate quickly. Petticoats, chemises, skirts, overskirts, bodices, jackets, each stacked like geological strata of elegance. By the time the ensemble is complete, the woman looks like a masterpiece and a cautionary tale at the same time. She can barely bend. You watch her attempt to sit, only to settle on the edge of the chair with a stiffness that would impress a marble statue. She smiles politely as though the sensation of being encased in fabric is a cherished spiritual exercise. Hats add an extra layer of drama. A parade of options appears before her, some adorned with ribbons, others with feathers, and one featuring a small taxidermied bird that stares at you as though it, too, questions the meaning of its existence. The mistress chooses a hat so large it seems capable of altering the weather. The maid pins it in place with the delicacy of a surgeon. You wonder if the pins are meant to secure the hat or punish anyone bold enough to remove it improperly. Men do not escape the tyranny of fashion either. You watch a gentleman wrestle himself into a collar so stiff it could serve as a weapon. His waistcoat must be buttoned precisely, not too loose, not too tight, and his cravat tied with a flourish that suggests effortless charm, even though it clearly took him several attempts. His shoes shine with obsessive perfection, polished until they reflect his expression of mild suffering. He stands tall, elegant, and thoroughly uncomfortable, ready to face the world while praying he does not need to bend his neck. Walking in these outfits requires strategy. Women glide not because grace is natural, but because taking normal steps would cause catastrophic fabric collisions. Men maintain straight backs because leaning risks disrupting their carefully arranged layers. You join a group strolling through a park and find yourself moving cautiously, aware that skirts sweep like heavy curtains and sleeves puff out with ambitions of their own. Even breathing must be measured so as not to disturb the delicate balance of aesthetics and restraint. Fashion also carries moral weight. A dress cut too low signals impropriety. A skirt hem too short whispers scandal. Colors speak their own coded language. Blue may imply tranquility. Scarlet might suggest boldness, verging on danger. Black could be mourning or sophistication, depending on the context and the eyebrows of onlookers. You witness a man glance at a woman's gloves, then exchange a look with his companion, as if the gloves alone reveal her entire life story. You marvel at how these people decode each other's wardrobes with the enthusiasm of detectives. Children are not spared. You see a little girl dressed in layers that nearly swallow her, ribbons flying behind her like surrender flags. A boy stands stiffly in a miniature suit that clearly prevents all natural movement. He attempts to run, makes it 3 steps, and gives up entirely. The adults beam with pride. You suspect the children dream of clothing that allows bending. Despite the absurdity, there is beauty in the ritual. The fabrics shimmer, the silhouettes transform bodies into artwork, and the attention to detail is astonishing. Yet beneath the elegance lies a quiet truth. Fashion here demands proof of endurance. It rewards those willing to sacrifice comfort to maintain order, elegance, and the delicate social fabric that binds this world together. By the time you leave the house, watching skirts sway and collars gleam under the afternoon sun, you understand why discomfort reigns. In a society obsessed with appearances, suffering becomes a strange badge of honor. Each garment is a reminder that beauty requires discipline, and discipline requires the ability to smile politely while wearing a cage disguised as clothing. You begin to understand Victorian health superstitions the moment you notice how everyone seems terrified of something you cannot see. Posture, air currents, mattress firmness, even the angle at which someone tilts their chin while reading a book, everything connects back to the body's fragile balance. You watch a woman straighten her spine with the urgency of someone preventing disaster, and it becomes clear that good posture is not merely elegance, it is survival. A crooked back is believed to invite internal collapse, emotional weakness, and possibly moral decay. You sit a little straighter without thinking, suddenly aware of your vertebrae, as if they are tiny Victorian critics evaluating your choices. A gentleman nearby adjusts his chair exactly 3 inches away from the hearth. Not closer, not farther. He sits with the calculated precision of a man diffusing a bomb. You soon learn fires must be approached with caution. Too much warmth disrupts the body's natural equilibrium. Too little warmth invites chills, which Victorians fear more than betrayal. The entire room arranges themselves around the fireplace in concentric circles of cautious comfort. You slide into place, trying to look like someone who always knew the rules of thermal etiquette. Bedtime introduces even stranger beliefs. When the household prepares for sleep, the rituals begin with the careful shutting of windows to avoid night air, which Victorians treat like a villainous force drifting through darkness in search of lungs to torment. A maid closes the shutters with a soft thud, then lines the edges with fabric to block drafts completely. The room feels still, quiet, and slightly ominous. You ask yourself whether the air has truly changed or whether you simply absorbed their fear by accident. The bed itself resembles a fortified structure. The mattress must be neither too soft nor too firm. The pillows must support the neck at a spiritual angle. Sheets must be smoothed until not a single wrinkle threatens the sleeper's health. A wrinkle, you are told, can cause ailments by disturbing nocturnal harmony. You stare at the bed, wondering how anyone rests while performing this nightly examination of textiles. A maid demonstrates the correct folding of the top sheet, with reverence usually reserved for religious rites. Even dreams hold meaning here. A restless night signals imbalance or hidden emotional storms that require corrective habits in the morning. One woman explains to you, with utter seriousness, that nightmares stem from lying on one's left side for too long. You shift immediately to your right, afraid to appear defiant in the face of such certainty. She nods approvingly, unaware you changed positions out of pure panic rather than belief. During the day, health superstitions influence every action. People avoid reading at odd angles to protect their eyesight and possibly their sanity. They carry smelling salts to revive the spirit, even when the spirit is doing perfectly fine. They drink tonics made from herbs, minerals, and occasionally substances no doctor today would dare prescribe. These tonics taste like punishment, yet Victorians swallow them dutifully, convinced discomfort indicates effectiveness. You take one sip and immediately question your will to live. Walking outdoors also follows rules. Turning corners must be done carefully to avoid sudden winds. Lingering near stagnant water invites misfortune. Passing by construction sites threatens the lungs. You notice people crossing the street to avoid piles of leaves, not because they are slippery, but because they hide dampness, which hides illness. You follow them instinctively, even though the logic escapes you. Their conviction is contagious. Children are raised within this forest of superstitions. You see a mother correcting her son's posture with gentle taps, as though shaping clay. She warns him not to slouch lest his internal organs descend. He straightens instantly. A girl practices breathing exercises intended to strengthen the lungs, inhaling with her chin raised like a triumphant bird. Even playtime must be moderated. Running too hard stirs the blood in dangerous ways. Laughing too loudly disturbs equilibrium. Childhood becomes a series of measured joys. By the time night settles again, you lie in a carefully prepared bed, hands folded neatly, posture straight, breathing shallow enough to avoid stirring harmful currents. You stare at the ceiling, replaying the countless rituals of wellness displayed throughout the day. In this world, health is a fragile equation, solved through superstition and maintained through vigilance. The fear, logic, and comfort intertwine until they become indistinguishable. As your eyes grow heavy, you finally understand. These people are not merely dramatic. They are trying to survive a world they cannot fully explain, using rituals to create order where science has not yet arrived. And in the quiet of that realization, you adjust your pillow to the approved angle and surrender to sleep with the caution of someone who now believes that even resting requires skill. You discover the Victorian relationship with noise the moment you step onto a quiet street and feel as though you have wandered into a museum where sound itself is contraband. The city is bustling, yet strangely muted, as if everyone took a solemn vow to move through life on tiptoe. You watch a man close a door with the gentleness of someone handling a newborn bird. A woman drops a handkerchief but catches it before it touches the ground. Avoiding the horrific gasp that would follow the faintest thud, you begin to sense that silence here is more than politeness. It is a civic duty upheld with the intensity usually reserved for national defense. Inside a Victorian home, the rules tighten even further. Carpets cover nearly every inch of the floor. Not for comfort, but to muffle footsteps. The house feels padded, softened, wrapped in an invisible cocoon designed to prevent even the whisper of a heel from carrying through the hallway. A maid glides past you on silent feet, performing her tasks with the stealth of a trained spy. You try to imitate her and immediately step too heavily, causing the faintest creak from a floorboard. She shoots you a look so sharp you straighten instinctively. It is astonishing how much judgment can hide in one raised eyebrow. The residents of the home speak softly, voices hovering just above a whisper. Conversations flow like drifting mist, never rising into full sound. Even laughter has boundaries. You hear a gentleman chuckle, but the sound is so subdued, it feels like an apology. Another person allows a small laugh to escape, and three heads turn in synchronized disapproval. You make a mental note. Joy must be expressed politely, as though joy itself is suspicious. You observe a group gathering in a parlor for afternoon reading. No one dares turn a page too loudly. Paper rustles carefully, precisely, as though disturbed parchment might summon catastrophe. A woman nearby sets down her teacup, ensuring the saucer accepts it without a single clink. The effort would seem exaggerated, if not for the collective look of relief that spreads through the room when the cup lands silently. You marvel at their ability to transform mundane gestures into quiet performances. Outdoors, the obsession continues. Horses trot in well-practiced rhythms to minimize the sound of hooves. The carriages they pull are fitted with leather straps and padded interiors to reduce clatter. Even the drivers modulate their commands into soft murmurs. You pass a construction site where workers use tools dampened with cloth to lessen the noise. Watching a hammer wrapped like a poorly bandaged limb strike a wooden frame is almost comedic, yet no one else finds it strange. Maintaining silence is an act of communal respect, and everyone participates as if the city might crumble under the weight of a loud sneeze. Children face the strictest expectations. You see a boy dart across a courtyard before stopping abruptly when his shoes scrape the stone too loudly. His nursemaid appears instantly, placing a finger to her lips. He nods solemnly and resumes play at a volume that barely qualifies as movement. A group of girls nearby play a quiet clapping game, adjusting the rhythm each time a sound grows too bold. Their ability to enforce their own rules of volume astonishes you. Even illness must be quiet. A man coughs into a handkerchief with the delicacy of someone trying to hide a state secret. A woman excuses herself to another room before clearing her throat. You hear someone upstairs sneeze, but the sound is so muffled you wonder whether it was intentional suppression or an advanced skill acquired over years of practice. As evening falls, households dim their lights and slip into a near-ceremonial silence. Doors close softly, footsteps fade, conversations settle into murmurs stitched into the fabric of the night. You sit in a nearly silent parlor, surrounded by people who seem trained to coexist without disturbing the air between them. It feels peaceful, in a strange, rigid way, as if the absence of noise is the foundation upon which their world is built. Eventually, you understand the logic behind it. In a society obsessed with order and decorum, noise represents chaos. It disrupts composure. It hints at carelessness. Silence becomes a form of discipline, a shared vow to protect the delicate equilibrium of daily life. And as you walk down a dim corridor, careful to avoid the floorboards you now know by heart, you realize you have absorbed their reverence for quiet. In the Victorian world, silence is not simply golden. It is mandatory, measured, and meticulously kept. A civic duty everyone performs with unwavering devotion. You learn the rules surrounding Victorian children the moment you encounter a small cluster of them in a garden, playing with the careful restraint of actors in a morality play. Their movements are gentle, their voices soft, and their expressions diligently curated to reflect innocence so pure it feels curated. You stand at a distance, watching them jump rope with steps so tidy, you suspect the rope itself has memorized the rhythm expected of it. Childhood here is not wild. It is managed, sculpted, and constantly supervised by adults who behave as though innocence is a fragile mineral that will crumble if handled improperly. A governess stands nearby, posture impeccable, gaze alert. She observes the children with the intensity of someone guarding a priceless artifact. Every time a child laughs too loudly, she clears her throat softly. The laughter dissolves into polite warmth. When a boy begins to run, she lifts a gloved finger, and he immediately slows to a careful trot, as though speed poses a philosophical threat. You wonder if she has ever raised her voice. Probably not, Victorian authority whispers, and somehow that makes it terrifying. You approach cautiously, hoping not to disrupt the atmosphere. A little girl in ribbons glances at you, then glances away, practicing the modesty expected of her. Her dress is pristine, layered, and restrictive, designed to preserve her innocence physically as much as socially. She kneels to pick up a fallen flower but hesitates before touching the dirt. Contact with anything considered unrefined requires supervision. You watch her wait patiently until the governess nods permission, allowing her a moment of carefully sanctioned spontaneity. Inside the home, the regulations grow even more intricate. Children must remain upstairs during adult gatherings unless summoned for display, at which point they descend with ceremonial politeness. A boy demonstrates this for you, walking into the parlor with the stiffness of someone balancing a book on his head. He bows, recites a small poem as though reading from an invisible script, then withdraws quietly. The adults murmur praise about his refinement, while he retreats upstairs to resume being a child, though even that freedom is bounded by rules. Playtime indoors follows a schedule so detailed it resembles military planning. Dolls are arranged in ways that teach order. Picture books stress morality over adventure. Toys are selected not for fun but for suitability to character development. You observe a young girl gently brushing the hair of her porcelain doll, mimicking the gentleness expected of her future role in society. The doll stares blankly, unaware that it is a training device disguised as a companion. Boys, meanwhile, practice mild heroism. A set of tin soldiers marches across a rug in perfect formation. A boy narrates their journey in hushed tones, avoiding any storylines involving real danger, mischief, or rebellion. The governess listens closely, ready to intervene should imagination wander into inappropriate territory. Even fantasy here must behave. At meals, children sit at their own small table, straight-backed and silent unless addressed. You sit nearby and watch a girl carefully lift her spoon with the grace of someone twice her age. The boy beside her places his napkin on his lap with the solemnity of a judge. Childhood appetites are not indulged but disciplined. Crumbs are moral failings. Spills are existential crises. The slightest misstep triggers a politely delivered lecture about propriety. Bedtime rituals are equally curated. Stories chosen for them contain caution wrapped in sweetness. A mother reads aloud from a book that warns children against curiosity, against wandering, against questioning anything that resembles structure. You notice the children listening with wide eyes, absorbing every lesson. The candlelight flickers, casting shadows shaped like rules across the walls. When the story ends, the children thank their mother with soft voices before climbing into beds tucked so tightly they could double as envelopes of discipline. Yet beneath these layers of control, you sense something tender. These rules, overwhelming as they are, arise from a collective attempt to protect children in a world filled with illness, uncertainty, and harsh expectations. Innocence becomes both shield and cage. The adults worry that exposure to anything too real, too early, might shatter the fragile glow surrounding childhood, so they preserve it with rituals, silence, and supervision. As you watch a little boy fold his hands before sleep, you realize the Victorian notion of innocence is less about purity and more about preservation. They wrap their children in etiquette the way others wrap them in blankets, hoping the world cannot reach inside. You step quietly out of the room, careful not to disturb the delicate equilibrium. In this world, childhood is not a wild garden. It is a carefully tended greenhouse, where every leaf grows under watchful eyes, and every moment of wonder must be politely approved. You learn the Victorian rules surrounding servants the moment you enter a well-appointed home, and notice that every task, every movement, every whisper seems to happen by magic. A tray appears beside you without sound. A candle is lit the instant the room dims. A coat is taken from your shoulders before you finish removing your second sleeve. You turn, expecting to thank someone, but the servant has already disappeared, absorbed into the house like a shadow obeying choreography. No one teaches outsiders. It is then you realize something peculiar. Servants here are expected to be invisible, and the people they serve work tirelessly to pretend that invisibility is perfectly natural. At breakfast, this invisible performance becomes unmistakable. You sit at a table where a silver pot of tea appears the moment your cup is empty. No one acknowledges the person who filled it. A maid glides past like a breeze, adjusting plates and picking up crumbs before they even settle. The family continues their conversation without pausing, without glancing toward her, as if the room itself possesses intelligence and initiative. You try to show appreciation with a smile, but she averts her gaze quickly, not out of coldness but because her role forbids the exchange. To be seen is to interrupt the machinery of propriety. You soon understand that servants must master the art of presence without presence. They move through corridors on softened feet, avoiding loud steps and unnecessary noise. You hear one clearing a fireplace with quick, precise motions, stopping the moment a family member approaches. She steps back into a shadowed alcove, allowing them to pass as though she were never there. You feel a strange pull in your chest, a mix of admiration and discomfort, watching human beings hide themselves so thoroughly for the comfort of others. Downstairs, the rules shift. The servants' quarters pulse with life. Laughter bubbles in the kitchen. Boots thump against wooden floors. Copper pans clang with unapologetic purpose. Here, invisibility is unnecessary. Stories are exchanged with animated gestures. Even gossip is spoken in full color. You step into the warmth of this world and feel the contrast immediately. The air seems freer. Faces are open. Voices are real. Yet the moment a bell rings, signaling the family's need, everything locks back into disciplined control. The kitchen quiets. The laughter dims. Each person returns to their position in the silent network. When you follow a footman up the stairs, you see how precisely he manages the space between you. He leads without walking too close, avoids turning his back too abruptly, and glances only at the floor. You realize this is not fear, but etiquette. Servants must never suggest equality, even unintentionally. Their distance protects the hierarchy, even if it costs them comfort or dignity. You feel the urge to tell him he does not need to be so careful, but the words stick in your throat. You sense the weight of tradition resting heavily over both of you. The family members maintain their own side of this dance. They speak to servants only when necessary, using clipped but polite tones. They avoid prolonged eye contact. Gratitude, when offered, is subtle enough not to disrupt the social structure. You witness a gentleman thank his valet with a barely perceptible nod, the kind one might give a particularly efficient clock. The valet accepts it with the correct combination of humility and pride. You marvel at the precision of these interactions. So rehearsed, they no longer appear human. One afternoon, you see a servant accidentally break the boundary. A maid carries a tray into the parlor and momentarily meets the eyes of a guest. It happens so fast you almost miss it, but you catch the flicker of panic. She lowers her gaze immediately. Withdrawing with such haste, it seems she fears she has shattered the delicate fabric of the universe. The guest glances at the hostess, unsure whether to react, and the hostess smooths the moment with a calm smile. Silence absorbs the mistake. You sit frozen, realizing how fragile the illusion truly is. Yet beneath this rigid etiquette lies a hidden truth. Servants are the keepers of the household's secrets. They see everything, hear everything, know everything. They understand the family's routines better than the family does. They navigate the home like its nervous system. Their invisibility protects not just the household's dignity, but its privacy. And though no one acknowledges it openly, the family depends on them completely. By evening, you have learned to recognize the signals. A distant bell, a faint footstep, a brief rustle of fabric, each marking the movement of someone weaving through the house like a spirit. You sit quietly, watching as a servant tends to the lamps, passing so close you feel the air shift. She never meets your eyes, but you sense her awareness of every person in the room. As night settles, you understand why the etiquette exists. It keeps the social order from unraveling. It maintains peace through distance, It transforms a household into a machine of rituals and illusions, yet you cannot escape the feeling that the invisible people hold the true shape of the home. In the Victorian world, servants move unseen, yet everything depends on them. Their invisibility is an expectation, a rule, a quiet burden, and an art mastered through endless practice. And as you watch one slip silently through a doorway, leaving the faint scent of lavender and effort behind, you realize you will never look at silence the same way again. You step into the parlor expecting warmth, chatter, perhaps even a plate of biscuits. But instead you find yourself in a chamber arranged with the precision of a political summit. Every chair is placed exactly where it must be, at angles calculated to promote conversation without encouraging too much of it. Sunlight filters through lace curtains in a way that feels both welcoming and slightly accusatory. You have barely crossed the threshold when you realize you are not merely visiting, you are performing. The hostess rises, gliding toward you with a practiced smile that communicates three things at once: delight at your presence, anxiety that you might stay too long, and a quiet evaluation of your posture, attire, and breathing patterns. You attempt a friendly greeting, but she responds with a phrase so formal it sounds like she spent all morning polishing it. You sense immediately that every syllable uttered in this room is weighed like gold dust. You take a seat and quickly learn that choosing the wrong chair carries consequences. The seat by the window suggests arrogance. The one closest to the hostess implies clinginess. The farthest seat makes you look aloof. You hover awkwardly before settling into a perfectly neutral location, hoping you have not inadvertently declared war on anyone's expectations. Even the sofa cushions feel tense, as if they too are trying their best to follow etiquette and avoid making noise. Tea arrives, and the room shifts into its second phase of negotiation. The hostess offers refreshments with the same solemnity that diplomats offer treaties. You must decline once, accept the second offer, and never ever reach spontaneously for anything on the table. A biscuit may be within easy reach, but touching it prematurely would break the delicate choreography. It sits there watching you, taunting you, daring you to ruin your social standing with a single impulsive gesture. Conversation unfolds like a fragile map you are terrified to fold incorrectly. You speak cautiously, aware that every topic is a field of hidden traps. Politics are forbidden. Illness is taboo unless someone else brings it up with the appropriate preface. Money is unspeakable. Personal opinions must be delivered gently, as though wrapped in silk and surrounded by disclaimers. Your words must drift like the steam rising from your teacup, forming shapes that dissolve before they inconvenience anyone. As the parlor fills with polite exchanges, you marvel at the emotional stamina required to survive such visits. You watch two guests navigate a discussion about the weather as if they are negotiating a ceasefire. One mentions rain with a tone of grave concern. The other nods solemnly, countering with a remark about the unpredictability of seasonal breezes. It is all very dramatic, though no one raises their voice or changes their expression. You sip your tea and realize you are witnessing a full-scale performance where nothing and everything is happening at once. The hostess manages the room like a conductor, ensuring each person speaks in turn. She subtly redirects conversations away from danger, laughs at the appropriate volume, and pretends not to notice when a guest's comment veers dangerously close to enthusiasm. Emotion must be moderated, filtered, and converted into something palatable. Any display beyond mild amusement is considered reckless. You imagine she spends hours after such gatherings lying on a chaise lounge, recovering from the sheer exertion of keeping the atmosphere delicately balanced. Soon, you realize that leaving the parlor requires as much strategy as entering it. You cannot simply stand and announce your departure. That would signal impatience or, worse, boredom. Instead, you must provide subtle cues. You shift gently in your seat. You mention the time without sounding rushed. You praise the tea with a tone that suggests deep gratitude and faint sorrow at the necessity of leaving. Only then does the hostess rise, granting you the permission you did not realize you were seeking. As you step toward the hallway, You sense the odd satisfaction that everyone feels when a visit concludes without disaster. The hostess beams, relieved that you followed the ritual correctly. The other guests nod politely, already preparing for the next round of carefully managed small talk. You walk outside and inhale deeply, filling your lungs with air that feels suspiciously freer. Only once you are beyond the garden gate do you fully understand what you just survived. A social visit here is not casual or spontaneous. It is a carefully orchestrated exchange where emotions are softened, words are polished, and everyone works tirelessly to preserve harmony. You look back at the quiet parlor window and almost admire the dedication required to maintain such delicate order. Victorian visits may appear gentle, polite, and refined, but beneath the lace and tea trays, you now recognize something else entirely. Diplomacy, strategy, a silent agreement to keep chaos outside the door. And as you walk away, you feel a strange mix of accomplishment and exhaustion, as if you have just participated in a treaty signing disguised as an afternoon chat. You awaken the next morning, believing you have begun to understand Victorian society, only to discover that you have yet to encounter the most exhausting realm of all. Gender expectations hang over the landscape like fog, thick enough to obscure the street and heavy enough to press on your lungs. Everything here, from posture to hobbies to the angle at which one tilts a hat, carries meaning far beyond your comprehension. You step outside and instantly feel the weight of invisible instructions settling onto your shoulders, as if the air itself is reminding you that you are expected to perform a certain identity with unwavering accuracy. You watch women glide down the street in gowns that defy physics, their steps slow and deliberate, as though they are moving through water rather than air. Behind them trails the expectation that they must be gentle, pleasant, ornamental, and perpetually calm. Their faces remain serene even as corsets cinch their ribs into submission and their skirts threaten to sweep innocent bystanders into the gutter. You imagine the quiet internal fortitude required to maintain elegance while your entire torso is being squeezed like dough being prepared for baking. Yet the Victorians consider this dignity and discipline not a daily battle for oxygen. Men, meanwhile, stride with purpose, their expressions set into careful neutrality. They must be firm without seeming cruel, intelligent without appearing arrogant, and emotional only when discussing topics deemed appropriate, which appears to be limited to the weather and the price of coal. You note that the ideal Victorian man is expected to project strength at all times, even while silently panicking about how expensive mustache wax has become. Any flicker of vulnerability is considered suspicious, as though admitting feelings might cause the entire empire to crumble. The pressure to conform radiates from every direction. A gentleman retrieves a fallen handkerchief for a lady, not because it is kind, but because failure to do so might label him unfit for polite society. A woman lowers her gaze when spoken to by elders, not out of shyness, but because propriety demands she appear modest, even if she possesses enough intelligence to win an argument with any philosopher of the era. Every gesture is a performance layered atop another performance, until even breathing feels like a choreographed act. You wander into a park and observe a young couple walking at an approved, chaperoned distance. They exchange stiff smiles that somehow convey entire novels of longing, fear, hope, and frustration. The young man dares to comment on the beauty of the day, and the young woman responds with a delicate laugh that sounds like she practiced it in front of a mirror. Their chaperone hovers behind them like a moral scarecrow, ensuring no one accidentally experiences joy without supervision. Farther down the path, a group of boys engage in vigorous outdoor activity to prove their future manliness. Their games are supposed to develop strength, character, and all the qualities required to run an empire, but half of them look like they would rather sit down with a book. One boy hesitates before joining a race, and his friend's glare reminds him that expressing reluctance is not an approved masculine trait. He sprints forward, face filled with determination and mild terror, because the alternative is social exile at age 10. You retreat indoors, thinking the rules might loosen within private walls, But the parlor holds its own iron script. Women are expected to embroider, read acceptable literature, and maintain an air of pleasant refinement. Men are encouraged to discuss business or philosophy, always with the correct level of seriousness. If anyone speaks with too much enthusiasm, the room shifts uncomfortably, as if passion itself is an uninvited guest. You begin to understand why spiritual exhaustion seems woven into the wallpaper. These expectations demand constant vigilance, the kind monks reserve for divine instruction. You imagine saints observing Victorian society and deciding that this level of restraint requires supernatural patience. Every moment is a test, every word a potential misstep, and every gesture an opportunity to accidentally reveal too much humanity. By the time you step outside again, you feel as if you have lived 3 separate lives in a single day. You straighten your posture, adjust your clothing, and attempt to blend in, knowing full well the standards here would strain even the most disciplined soul. Victorian gender expectations are not simply rules. They are a lifelong endurance trial disguised as grace. You learn the Victorian rules of emotion the moment you witness a woman receive a letter whose contents clearly shake her, yet her expression barely changes. Her fingers tremble for half a heartbeat before she composes herself, smoothing the lace at her cuff as if the fabric itself can anchor her. Emotion here is not denied. It is hidden carefully, folded into gestures so small they nearly vanish. You realize that lace is not decorative. It is camouflage. A gentleman sits across the room reading the newspaper with a frown so subtle it might be mistaken for concentration. The article clearly irritates him, yet the only evidence is the gentle tightening of his jaw, quickly covered by a sip of tea. Victorians treat emotion like contraband. It cannot disappear entirely, but it must be smuggled beneath layers of propriety. You watch him lower the paper, inhale slowly, and comment on the weather, because frustration must always exit the body disguised as politeness. You walk through the parlor and feel the emotional undercurrents shifting beneath the calm surface. People speak in measured tones, offering cordial smiles that act as masks for deeper stories. A young woman laughs lightly at a joke that is not particularly funny, but the sound carries an edge you detect only because you are learning to listen the way they do. Reading meaning not from volume but from vibration. Her laugh is cut short when she notices her mother watching. She adjusts her posture and smooths her skirt, sealing away whatever she nearly revealed. You soon discover that displays of affection are even more restrained. A couple stands near a bookshelf, close enough that you sense their connection, yet their hands never touch. Instead, the woman runs her fingertips along the spine of a novel, pausing at one title for a moment too long. The gentleman notices and smiles faintly. It is their version of a declaration. In another era, the gesture would seem insignificant. Here it feels daring, almost scandalous, as though she whispered a secret through the language of fingertips. The household transitions into afternoon tea, a ritual that seems calm on the surface, but offers endless opportunities for concealed emotion. A hostess pours tea with the delicacy of someone aware that her guests are studying every movement. A slight tremor might reveal anxiety. A too firmly placed cup might indicate anger. You watch one woman lift her teacup and hold it for a moment before sipping, her eyes focused on the swirling liquid as though steadying herself. Only the faintest tightening of her knuckles betrays the storm beneath her composure. Grief is the most carefully choreographed emotion of all. You witness a widow entering the room, dressed in somber fabric softened by lace so intricate it looks like cobwebs spun from sorrow. Her face remains calm, but her clothing carries the weight of her feelings. Every fold, every shade, every stitch communicates what her expression cannot. She speaks gently, thanks people graciously, and maintains her posture even when her voice falters. The lace at her collar seems to flutter slightly, as though breathing for her whenever her composure wavers. Children absorb these rules with astonishing speed. A little girl trips over a step, catches herself, and instantly checks whether anyone noticed. She lifts her chin, brushing her dress as though dusting off not just dirt, but evidence of distress. A boy receives mild scolding but keeps his expression still, eyes steady even as disappointment flickers through them. You feel a pang of sympathy, realizing that even childhood must bow to the etiquette of emotional disguise. Later that evening, music drifts through the drawing room as someone plays a soft melody on the piano. The notes feel tender, almost wistful, and you finally understand that music becomes the one safe place where Victorians allow their emotions to escape. The pianist's fingers linger on certain keys, adding subtle flourishes that speak louder than any words she could offer aloud. The room listens politely, but beneath the calm faces, you sense shared understanding. Music is their loophole, their breath of honesty. As the day winds down, you find yourself standing near a window, watching a woman straighten a lace curtain with unnecessary care. Her fingers pause for just a moment, catching in the pattern as though she is grounding herself. That pause speaks more loudly than any confession. In this world, vulnerability lives in the smallest spaces, the brief hesitations, the quiet movements that reveal everything without saying anything. By the time night settles, you have learned that emotion here is not weaker for being hidden. It is stronger, pressured, distilled. It shimmers beneath lace, behind smiles, within lowered gazes, rapping gently against the walls built to contain it. And as you walk away from the parlor, you understand that expressing feeling openly would indeed be bold. Not because emotion is forbidden, but because revealing it means stepping momentarily beyond the protective veil that everyone else works so hard to maintain. You step outside the house expecting a simple walk, but the moment your shoes meet the street, you realize you have entered a stage where every person is both performer and audience. Victorians live beneath the constant gaze of public morality, a gaze so powerful it shapes posture, expression, and even the rhythm of footsteps. You walk slowly at first, trying to understand the invisible script everyone else seems to follow. People glide with purpose yet avoid appearing rushed. Their faces remain calm, even when carts rattle past or a child darts too close to a puddle. Daily life here feels less like living and more like rehearsing a play that never ends. A woman passes you carrying a basket of flowers, her back straight, her chin lifted, each step measured. She smiles politely, the kind of smile crafted for strangers, gentle and bright without revealing anything real. Her gloves are immaculate, not because she expects admiration, but because public morality demands visible purity. You sense she has spent her entire life training for moments like this one, where simply walking down a street becomes a demonstration of character. You notice a man ahead of you pause before entering a shop. He fixes his coat, adjusts his hat, smooths his hair, all in one fluid motion. Not a single thread is allowed to appear relaxed. Clothing must communicate virtue, restraint, and respectability. His expression shifts into something neutral yet pleasant, as though he is preparing for an important meeting rather than buying a loaf of bread. When he steps inside, he bows slightly to the shopkeeper, careful to show courtesy without warmth. Warmth can be misinterpreted. Everything can be misinterpreted. Public greetings unfold like choreography. You witness two neighbors acknowledge each other with nods that contain the exact proportions of friendliness and distance. A nod too deep implies eagerness. One too shallow hints at judgment. Their brief exchange of pleasantries lasts only a few seconds. Yet both carry themselves as if the conversation will be documented by unseen scribes. You find yourself adjusting your posture again, worried you might be failing at this strange test simply by existing too casually. Spending time in the town square reveals even more layers of this performance. Children play under watchful eyes, chasing one another without shouting too loudly or laughing too wildly. Their joy must remain refined, curated to reflect their upbringing. A boy skids on the cobblestones and catches himself, immediately checking to see if anyone noticed. His mother gives a small nod of approval when he composes himself quickly, smoothing his shirt with self-control that no child should realistically possess. He resumes playing with renewed caution, as though the ground itself is judging him. Vendors operate with the same discipline. A fruit seller arranges apples with ceremonial care, each one polished until it reflects the world in miniature. He calls out to customers in a moderate voice, confident yet tempered. You watch him straighten his stall whenever he finishes a sale, maintaining order as though moral decay begins with crooked fruit. The butcher next to him weighs meat with exaggerated precision, ensuring his fairness is fully visible. Even honesty demands performance. You begin to understand how fiercely people cling to these rules. Every action in public must reassure the community that order remains intact. Reputation is currency, and one careless gesture can cost more than money. A woman across the square drops her parasol, and before it touches the ground, two bystanders rush forward to help, each competing to display moral responsibility. She thanks them with a grateful but modest smile, careful not to encourage further attention. The moment ends, everyone resumes their roles, and the parasol incident becomes another thread woven into the daily tapestry of public virtue. At a nearby cafe, patrons sit at small tables sipping tea with such quiet elegance that even stirring sugar seems ceremonial. You join them, lifting your cup with newfound awareness, hoping not to clink porcelain against porcelain. The conversations around you drift like soft fog, topics chosen for safety rather than substance. No gossip that could damage reputations, no complaints that might reveal frustration, only the steady exchange of weather updates, compliments, and polished observations. You listen, realizing that the real art here lies in saying nothing while appearing to say something meaningful. By the time you finish your tea and rise to leave, you feel as though you have participated in an elaborate production without ever learning your lines. You breathe in the crisp air and realize even breathing must appear composed. Victorians believed that morality is witnessed through demeanor long before it is witnessed through deeds. Public life becomes a continuous expression of virtue, a performance designed to reassure one another that society is still holding itself upright, even when the world feels uncertain. As you walk away from the bustling square, the truth settles gently over you. In the Victorian world, morality is not private. It is displayed, practiced, and perfected until it becomes indistinguishable from daily routine. Every moment is a small stage, every gesture a message, every expression a promise, and you cannot help but wonder how anyone manages to carry such a burden with grace, day after day, beneath the quiet, relentless gaze of the world. You step into the heart of the Victorian city expecting refinement to stretch from one end of the street to the other, only to find that elegance and squalor sit side by side like mismatched neighbors forced into an awkward friendship. Your first glimpse is lovely enough. Gas lamps glow softly along polished avenues where ladies in silk glide toward carriages, their movements calm and deliberate. The cobblestones beneath them glisten as if they have been washed for the occasion. Everything feels orderly, composed, and pleasantly theatrical. Then you take 3 more steps and the illusion shatters. A cart rattles past carrying vegetables that look suspiciously close to retirement. A man tips his hat politely while stepping around something on the street you refuse to identify. The contrast hits you with such force that you pause, trying to reconcile the contradictory worlds pressed together in this single, restless city. You realize Victorian urban life is a kind of double exposure. 2 images overlapping, one polished for public display, the other raw and impossible to ignore. A well-dressed woman passes you, holding a lace handkerchief delicately to her nose as she navigates the shifting bouquet of coal smoke, horse manure, and overworked humanity. Her posture is perfect, her expression serene, but her steps grow faster as she approaches a corner where a group of boys shout and dart between puddles. She does not acknowledge them, yet she adjusts her pace with the precision of someone who has learned how to glide past the rough edges without letting them cling to her hems. Further along the street, gentlemen cluster outside a club, discussing business with the solemnity of statesmen. Their voices are low, their coats tailored, their boots polished. But even as they speak, a ragged man crouches not 10 feet away, warming his hands over a vent that leaks steam from the building's kitchen. He could be invisible for all the attention they give him. You stand between these 2 realities, unsure where to look, unsure what to feel, aware that both scenes belong to the same city and neither cancels the other out. The market square reveals an even sharper contradiction. The stalls closest to the center shimmer with abundance. Fruits stacked in perfect pyramids, flowers arranged in charming bouquets, everything touched by an almost theatrical sense of prosperity. But just beyond this manicured zone, the goods grow humbler and the smells stronger. Fish lie on cracked boards. Meat hangs from hooks that look like they have stories you do not want to hear. Vendors shout above the chaos, their voices hoarse from mornings filled with coal dust and cold air. You weave through the crowd, eyes darting between the elegance and the grit, as if the city is testing your ability to hold both truths at once. Children race through the maze of people, some in tidy smocks, others barefoot and quick as sparks. You watch a girl in fine clothing step aside with practiced grace as a boy streaks past, leaving a faint trail of mud in his wake. Her governess scolds him with sharp precision, though he is already 3 turns away, swallowed by the labyrinth of alleys that the respectable world pretends not to see. The contrast between their lives lingers in the air, unsettling and undeniable. You wander toward the river, following the sound of distant machinery. Along the embankment, men load crates into barges with movements that look both mechanical and weary. The river reflects the city's grandeur only when the sunlight hits at the right angle. Most of the time it churns with murky insistence, carrying debris from workshops and kitchens, a reminder that prosperity feeds on invisible labor. Yet just above the waterline stands a line of elegant townhouses, their windows gleaming, their curtains gently swaying as if nothing unpleasant ever drifts past them. In every direction the contradictions multiply. A fashionable couple strolls arm in arm, passing a group of factory workers, emerging for their midday break. A waiter escorts a gentleman into a cafe, where violin music drifts through the doorway, while a child sits outside on the curb eating crusts of bread. Carriages roll past with wheels so clean they seem untouched by the filth inches below them. A layer of soot settles on your sleeves even as you admire the intricate ironwork of the street lamps. By late afternoon you feel the city tugging at you from 2 sides. One part whispers refinement, order, and beauty. The other murmurs struggle, noise, and the weary breath of survival. You sense that Victorians navigate this duality daily, smoothing their gloves and straightening their hats while stepping carefully over reminders that elegance is only one half of their world. As the sun sinks and lamps flicker awake, the city transforms again, shadows softening the rough edges, glow illuminating the polished ones. For a brief moment the contradictions blur into something strangely harmonious. But beneath the surface, both realities remain, pulsing in rhythm with the restless streets. You leave the riverbank knowing you have not fully grasped the city. Perhaps no one does. Victorian urban life is a constant negotiation between what wants to be seen and what must be endured. A place where elegance and squalor live so close together they almost learn to share a heartbeat. You learn the true power of Victorian newspapers the moment you see a crowd gather at a street corner. Not because anything dramatic has happened, but because the morning edition has arrived. The paper boy shouts headlines with theatrical flair, waving a stack of thin, gray sheets that seem far too flimsy to hold so much influence. Yet people rush toward him as if he is distributing keys to the city. You watch hands snatch papers, coins clatter, voices rise, and suddenly the entire street bends toward the printed word like flowers turning toward the sun, or perhaps toward a storm. It is hard to tell. You buy a copy and scan the first page. The articles drift between politics, scandal, and curious tales meant to stir imaginations. Facts appear beside exaggerated reports, the truth nestled somewhere in the middle like a pearl buried in sand. Still, everyone reads with fierce devotion. A gentleman beside you adjusts his spectacles and murmurs to himself, his eyebrows climbing higher with every paragraph. You sense that whatever the paper prints will ripple through the city before noon, reshaping opinions and reputations with alarming speed. As you continue walking, you notice clusters of readers forming organically, each group functioning as an impromptu gossip mill. One woman points at a small column detailing a minor social misstep made at a recent dinner party. The way she speaks, you would think the offender committed an act of treason. Her companion clucks her tongue disapprovingly, and within seconds the story mutates, gaining details never mentioned in the paper. You witness gossip evolve in real time. The transformation so swift it would impress even seasoned storytellers. You turn a corner and find a tea shop buzzing with chatter. Newspapers lie scattered across tables like a second course. Patrons sip delicately while dissecting every snippet of printed drama. A gentleman folds his paper with a sigh, then announces that a well-known merchant may be facing financial trouble. His listeners react with hunger thinly disguised as concern. You realize these conversations serve as social currency. Knowing the latest news is less about information and more about positioning oneself on the correct side of public opinion. Outside, gossip travels even faster than the news. Two maids exchange hurried whispers over a garden wall. A coachman leans toward his passenger, sharing a rumor with the confidence of someone delivering essential truth. Even children repeat fragments of overheard adult conversations, sometimes blending them with imaginative embellishment that somehow makes their stories more believable. You marvel at how gossip does not simply move through the city. It thrives, multiplies, and adapts, surviving off the attention it is fed. Later in the day, you visit a parlor, where the air is thick with gentle voices and sharper intentions. Women sit in a circle, each armed with a fan and a perfectly neutral expression. One begins to share a small anecdote that sounds harmless at first, but as she speaks, the undertone sharpens. A raised eyebrow here, a soft sigh there, and suddenly the anecdote becomes cautionary tale. You watch the others nod solemnly, their faces conveying sympathetic interest, even as their eyes glimmer with the thrill of knowing something others do not. Social survival here hinges on staying informed, and staying informed requires constant, careful listening. A gentleman in another corner reads from the newspaper aloud, emphasizing certain words as though testing their weight. His audience murmurs agreement. No one questions the source. Printed words hold undeniable authority. Once something appears in ink, it becomes part of the city's collective truth. Even if the truth was stretched thin to fit the column space, you sense a quiet desperation beneath the surface of these conversations, a need to remain on stable footing in a world where reputations shift with each edition. As the afternoon light dims, you find yourself in a quiet alley where an elderly man sits reading yesterday's newspaper. He folds it thoughtfully, as if remembering the stories it carried before new ones replaced them. The city changes quickly, he tells you, without looking up, and anyone who does not keep up risks being left behind. You recognize the exhaustion in his voice. For Victorians, news is not merely information. It is a lifeline, a guide, a warning. Gossip is the shadow trailing behind it, ready to strike at any misstep. By evening, the latest tidbits have permeated the town like scent in the air. Conversations everywhere feel sharpened, weighted, threaded with new implications. You sense how precarious social survival truly is. A single rumor can lift someone or ruin them. A misunderstood headline can spark days of cautious behavior. People hold their composure as if carrying delicate glass, aware that a poorly chosen word might fracture everything. As you walk back through the dimming streets, folded newspaper under your arm, you realize Victorians do not simply read the news. They live inside it. It shapes their interactions, molds their judgments, and fuels the endless engine of whispered stories. It is the quiet force guiding society's hand, and every citizen, willing or not, becomes a participant in its restless spread. You learn the Victorian relationship with superstition the moment you mention feeling slightly unwell, and three people immediately reach for completely different remedies, none of which involve actual medical advice. A woman presses lavender to your wrist, insisting its aroma will realign your inner balance. A gentleman urges you to avoid sitting near open windows so night air cannot invade your lungs. A maid hurriedly hands you a sprig of rosemary, whispering that it wards off weakening spirits. You stand there clutching herbs like a decorative bouquet, realizing this world treats superstition as both shield and compass in a landscape where science has made promises but has not yet delivered answers. As you walk through town, you notice symbols scattered everywhere once you know where to look. Horseshoes hang above doorways with solemn reverence. Mirrors are positioned carefully to bounce misfortune away. Even the simplest object can carry meaning. You see a woman pause before stepping over a crack in the sidewalk, lifting her skirts delicately, as if misfortune itself lies waiting beneath the stone. Her friends nod approvingly, relieved she has avoided the invisible threat. You step around the same crack out of pure peer pressure. Your next encounter comes at a small shop selling tonics, charms, and remedies that blur the line between healing and hope. The shelves gleam with bottles labeled in looping script: vigor, tincture, lung fortifier, spirit bracer. The shopkeeper assures you that each one is backed by both tradition and testimonials, which in Victorian terms means stories repeated so many times they have become unassailable truth. A man buys a bottle of headache tonic containing ingredients you do not recognize and likely should never ingest. He drinks it with confidence, declaring he already feels stronger. You suspect he feels stronger because he believes he should. You step back into the street and hear chimes ringing from somewhere above. You look up to find small bells hanging outside a window, swaying lightly in the wind. A passerby explains they keep dark omens from entering the home, though she cannot specify which omens or why they require bells. The explanation does not matter. The bells remain, and she walks on with the certainty of someone who has long ago accepted that unseen forces respond well to gentle noise. At the park, you observe a group of women practicing morning exercises meant to ward off illness. Their movements seem borrowed from dance and ritual, arms lifting and falling in patterns choreographed more for spiritual defense than physical health. One woman corrects your posture, warning that slouching invites weakness. Another insists that breathing too deeply may stir harmful vapors in the air. You nod, adjusting your stance, trying to decide which rule to obey first. Their confidence is contagious, even when the logic drifts beyond reach. The children reveal another layer of superstition entirely. You watch them carefully. Avoid stepping on the shadows of certain trees, convinced the branches hold unlucky energy. A boy tosses salt over his shoulder after dropping his lunch, muttering words he refuses to repeat. A girl carries a small charm in her pocket to protect her from misadventures, though she cannot define what qualifies as one. Childhood here is shaped not just by rules, but by whispered warnings passed down like heirlooms. In a baker's shop, you hear a woman order bread made only from dough kneaded during daylight. She explains that dough touched after sunset becomes spiritually heavy, affecting dreams and temperament. The baker nods solemnly, treating the superstition not as an inconvenience but as a professional obligation. You watch him slice the bread with a reverence normally reserved for relics. Even illness follows these patterns. When someone coughs, the room reacts with organized chaos. Windows open slightly to release troubled air. Herbs are burned in small dishes to purify the surroundings. People step back 3 paces, not out of fear of germs, but fear of whatever unseen imbalance caused the cough in the first place. Science offers theories, but superstition offers certainty. By evening, you sit near a hearth listening to a group recount stories that blur fact and cautionary myth. Tales of phantom chills, unlucky coincidences, and mysterious ailments drift through the room. Each story ends with a remedy or ritual, always described with unwavering conviction. You sense that these superstitions fill the empty spaces where knowledge has yet to settle, providing comfort in a world where danger often arrives without warning or explanation. As the fire crackles, you realize superstition does not stem from ignorance alone. It springs from longing, fear, hope, and the need to believe that people can protect themselves against the unpredictable currents of life. In this world of shifting knowledge and uncertain cures, rituals become anchors, belief becomes balm. You leave the hearth with a small charm pressed into your hand by someone who insists it promotes good fortune. You do not believe in it, not entirely. Yet you slip it into your pocket, aware that in a place where science has not answered every question, superstition steps forward to fill the silence. You learn Victorian travel etiquette the moment you attempt to board a carriage and realize there is an order to things so strict it might as well be carved into stone. Travelers gather in a loose cluster that immediately becomes rigid the instant someone moves. A gentleman steps forward first, offering assistance to a woman whose expression suggests she is deeply accustomed to being assisted, whether she wants it or not. You hesitate, unsure where you fit in this hierarchy, until someone behind you clears their throat with the weight of centuries. You step aside, humbled by a rule you did not even know existed. Once on board, the etiquette tightens further. You sit with your back straight, hands placed neatly, trying to appear composed as the carriage jolts forward with all the grace of a determined mule. It becomes clear that discomfort is expected, endured, ignored. You glance around and observe that no one reacts to the bumps or rattling wheels. Victorians possess an uncanny ability to sit calmly through chaos, their expressions fixed in polite neutrality, as though acknowledging the roughness of the ride would be vulgar. A woman across from you lifts her parasol slightly to shield herself from a draft, careful not to disturb the man beside her. The man adjusts his coat with slow precision to avoid brushing against her sleeve. Every gesture is choreographed to preserve personal boundaries, which exist here even in cramped quarters. Conversation is permitted, but only if initiated by someone of appropriate social standing, and even then, it must be performed in soft tones, incapable of offending the air itself. You attempt a small remark about the weather and immediately sense it was too spontaneous. The gentleman nods politely, offering a response so brief it dissolves into the space between you. You realize travel conversation must be mild, predictable, and entirely free of surprise. Anything more passionate might cause the carriage to collapse in moral embarrassment. At the next stop, passengers disembark in reverse order, following a sequence so intricate you fear there might be a test afterward. A porter steps forward to help unload luggage, each piece handled as though it contains something delicate, embarrassing, or both. Trunks are arranged on the platform with ceremonial reverence. You notice the labels affixed to them, which subtly indicate the owner's status, wealth, and intended destination. Even luggage participates in the performance. Boarding a train offers its own labyrinth of expectations. The platform teems with travelers, yet everyone moves with deliberate restraint. You watch as men remove their hats when speaking to women, as women lift their skirts just enough to avoid soot without revealing anything scandalous. A mother instructs her child not to run, not to shout, not to breathe too enthusiastically. The child nods solemnly, absorbing rules like a sponge absorbing water. Inside the train compartment, the world narrows into a small room where strangers must coexist with excruciating politeness. You choose a seat and instantly begin evaluating your posture again. Too relaxed and you seem uncultured. Too rigid and you seem anxious. You settle on cautious elegance, hands folded, ankles aligned, hoping no one will notice how unnatural this feels. As the train begins to move, the countryside blurs past the window, a patchwork of fields, chimneys, and distant hills. Passengers comment on the scenery only in approved phrases, praising the greenness of the fields or the tranquility of distant farms. You want to express genuine amazement at the speed of the train, but Victorians treat amazement as a childish indulgence. You nod along, adopting their tone of composed appreciation. Etiquette dictates that no one eat anything overly aromatic, and certainly nothing that might crunch loudly. A woman unwraps a small biscuit and takes microscopic bites, each one leaving no trace of sound. A man sips tea from a thermos, holding the cup close to his mouth to prevent sloshing. You become acutely aware of every breath you take, convinced it echoes through the compartment. When the train slows near a station, everyone prepares with ceremonial readiness. Bags are lifted calmly. Coats are buttoned. Hats are placed. No one rushes, yet everyone is somehow prepared at the same time. You follow suit, gripping your modest valise with the confidence of someone pretending they have rehearsed this moment. Stepping onto the platform, you feel the strange relief that comes from surviving a social ordeal without committing any visible errors. Travel, in the Victorian world, is not merely a journey from one place to another. It is a trial of character, endurance, and etiquette. Every mile requires discipline. Every moment is a quiet examination. As you continue down the platform, blending into the sea of composed travelers, you finally understand why Victorians treat travel with such seriousness. Between the rattling carriages, the stiff compartments, and the endless rules, the journey becomes a measure of one's ability to remain elegant despite every discomfort. And here, maintaining grace is not just etiquette, it is victory. You begin to understand the Victorian relationship with privacy, the moment you wake to the sound of footsteps passing your bedroom door, even though you are quite certain you did not ask anyone to be there. The corridor outside your room becomes a thoroughfare of servants, family members, and distant cousins who appear without warning, each moving with discreet purpose while simultaneously absorbing every detail of your existence. You sit up, blinking sleep from your eyes, and realize the concept of personal space here is less a right and more a polite fiction. Everyone pretends to respect while constantly violating. As you dress, you hear voices drifting through the walls, soft enough to sound accidental but clear enough to reveal that conversations are never truly private. Houses in this era are built like instruments, carrying sound along beams and floors until even a whisper becomes communal property. A woman in the next room sighs, and her maid responds before the sigh has even faded. A man 2 rooms away clears his throat, and someone asks if he is feeling unwell. You stand frozen, realizing that your own breathing is probably being cataloged and interpreted in real time. Descending the stairs, you pass through a hallway where letters sit, stacked neatly on a tray. The envelopes remain sealed, but their destinations have already been noted, their return addresses examined, and their weight silently judged. Mail is not just correspondence, it is evidence. A letter from a distant aunt suggests obligation. A letter from a gentleman suggests interest. A letter from an unfamiliar name sparks speculation so intense it could power a small town. Secrets shrink the moment ink touches paper. In the breakfast room, you take a seat while the family exchanges polite greetings layered with subtext. You sense immediately that everyone knows everything about everyone else, not through explicit confession but through the invisible network of whispers that binds the household. A sideways glance from an aunt tells you she has already heard about the book you were reading last night. A too kind smile from a cousin suggests she knows why you did not sleep well. You chew your toast slowly, wondering how much you revealed by merely existing in the same building. Stepping outside, you hope the open air will grant you freedom, but the city offers even less privacy. Neighbors stand at windows with the subtle intensity of seasoned observers. Shopkeepers greet you by name despite never having been introduced. Children playing in the street recite details about passers-by with eerie accuracy. You stop at a corner, feeling the weight of invisible eyes assessing where you came from, where you are going, and why you chose such an expression while walking there. In the market square, gossip flows like water, pooling around every stall. Vendors chat with customers while subtly sharing information about others nearby. A woman purchasing herbs becomes a story about her health. A man buying silk becomes a theory about his romantic prospects. You listen, fascinated and alarmed, as anecdotes swell into narratives that grow legs and sprint across the city. Secrets here do not stay buried, they barely stay seated. Afternoon tea in a friend's parlor reveals another truth. Even when conversations appear innocent, they often serve as excavations. A question about your day becomes a test. A compliment on your attire becomes an inquiry. A polite remark about your plans becomes a delicate attempt to extract more. You answer carefully, aware that too many details invite scrutiny, while too few provoke suspicion. You watch others navigate the same tightrope, offering smiles so practiced they might as well be uniforms. You retreat to the garden for solitude, but even nature cannot protect you. A gardener tending roses offers unsolicited observations about your mood. A passing maid pauses to inform you that someone is looking for you inside. The breeze carries snippets of conversation from an open window, reminding you that isolation is a rare and fragile commodity. You breathe deeply, hoping the plants at least will not repeat what they witness, though you catch a rose swaying in a manner that feels judgmental. As evening falls, you witness a final confirmation. A family member confides in another, speaking quietly, emotions threading through the words. But before the confession even ends, a servant passing by absorbs the meaning with instinctive accuracy. Within an hour, the entire household will feel the ripple. Secrets circulate with the efficiency of blood, sustaining social life even as they drain privacy from those who hold them. By the time you retire, you understand the truth. In the Victorian world, privacy is a luxury few can afford and even fewer can maintain. Walls are thin, windows are many, and people have turned observation into an art form. Secrets become stories, stories become judgments, and judgments become the fabric of daily life. You lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, accepting the unavoidable reality that here, nothing stays hidden for long. Not intentions, not feelings, not even the quiet thoughts you try to keep to yourself. In this era, secrets do not stay buried. They are unearthed, examined, and shared with the soft precision of a cultural ritual that no one questions, yet everyone practices with unwavering devotion. You notice the shift quietly at first, like a faint tremor beneath polished shoes and tightly laced corsets. Victorian rules, once so ironclad they felt woven into the air itself, begin to loosen their grip. You stand in a parlor filled with guests who do not realize they are witnessing the slow unraveling of their world. A young woman sits with her ankles crossed a little too casually. A gentleman voices an opinion with more enthusiasm than etiquette typically permits. No one gasps. No one faints. The room absorbs the breach like fabric stretching just slightly beyond its seam. You step outside, and the city greets you with new sounds, sharper and faster than the murmur of horse hooves you have grown accustomed to. A motor car rattles past, sputtering like an impatient creature, leaving a trail of fumes that makes pedestrians recoil. The driver sits upright, proud, reckless, and entirely uninterested in the old rules of decorum. He salutes no one, tips his hat to no one, and barrels onward as if the future has appointed him its advance scout. People stare, torn between horror and fascination. You can almost see the older gentlemen clutching their walking sticks as though bracing against an oncoming storm of progress. In a nearby cafe, you hear laughter not softened by Victorian restraint but released freely, lightly, as though shaped by a new era that cares more for authenticity than polished performance. Women sit at tables without chaperones, speaking with voices that carry just a little too far. They discuss ideas rather than weather, books rather than lace, ambitions rather than posture. Some men look uncomfortable, adjusting their collars as if they sense their monopoly on public conversation slipping away. You sip your tea and feel the room tilting, the ground shifting beneath the delicate architecture of long-standing rules. Newspapers grow thicker as modernity tightens its grip. Articles brim with inventions, theories, and debates that would once have been whispered cautiously behind closed doors. Electrical experiments, medical breakthroughs, machines capable of outworking entire factories of men. Each headline frays another thread of the old world view. You watch readers grapple with it, their eyes darting across the page with a mixture of awe and disbelief. Some cling to tradition with renewed fervor, insisting nothing truly needs to change. Others embrace the coming transformation so quickly it is a wonder they do not trip over their own optimism. On the streets, fashion begins to abandon the elaborate silhouettes that once defined elegance. Skirts narrow slightly, collars loosen, and fabrics shift toward practicality. You spot a woman walking briskly, her steps purposeful, unburdened by excessive layers. She moves with a freedom that would have scandalized her grandmother. A man nearby watches her with raised brows, unsure whether he is witnessing impropriety or evolution. The uncertainty lingers in the air, like the scent of a coming storm. Even the rigid boundaries of class begin to blur. You see wealthy families reading novels written by those who would once have been dismissed as social outsiders. You hear factory workers discussing political ideas that challenge the established order. You witness servants speaking a bit more boldly, their voices less muted, their presence slightly more acknowledged. It is subtle, but the shift is unmistakable. The invisible lines that once divided society begin to smudge under the weight of new thought. The parlor, once a sanctuary of propriety, now welcomes strangers with unusual occupations, travelers carrying stories from far corners of the world, artists whose ideas escape neat categorization. They speak passionately, almost rebelliously, testing the patience of older guests who sip their tea with the tight smiles of people holding on to the past by sheer will. You stand between these two worlds, sensing the fragile balance. The old rules do not shatter all at once. They peel away slowly, like wallpaper losing its ability to cling. As evening falls, gas lamps flicker beside newly installed electric lights, the two sources illuminating the street together in uneasy partnership. Children run past you without lowering their voices. A young couple walks unchaperoned, hands brushing with daring familiarity. A newspaper seller shouts headlines of scientific marvels that would have sounded like magic just years earlier. You walk home through a city that feels both ancient and newborn. The Victorian rules that once governed every gesture now drift like paper scraps carried by a rising wind. Some cling stubbornly to fences, refusing to release their hold. Others lift into the air and vanish. You realize you are watching a world in transition, caught between the comfort of order and the promise of change. Modernity creeps in not as a conqueror, but as a quiet, persistent whisper that grows louder each day, asking everyone to decide which rules still matter and which ones were only ever held together by fear and habit. You step back from the Victorian world as though emerging from a dense forest, blinking at the sudden clarity you did not realize you were missing. The air feels lighter outside their rules, as if you have slipped out of a corset you never actually wore, but somehow felt tightening all the same. You look over your shoulder at the era you just navigated, expecting to shake your head at the absurdity of it all. And you do. But then, beneath the absurdity, you sense something else lingering quietly, like the hum of a machine you only notice after it stops. You replay the rules in your mind, each one sharpened by memory. The agonizingly polite greetings, the choreographed walks, the rituals of tea, the rituals of breathing, the unspoken laws governing forks, hats, glances, letters, silence. All of it feels ludicrous now, almost theatrical in its intensity. Yet as you watch the Victorian world from this distance, you begin to understand why these rules existed, woven into every thread of daily life like a protective charm against chaos. Their streets were unpredictable, their science young, their fears plentiful, and their certainties few, so they shaped behavior with an elaborate code, believing stability could be constructed from etiquette just as surely as bridges were built from steel. You see how each rule, excessive, burdensome, occasionally hilarious, formed a scaffold that kept society from collapsing into its own anxieties. When you picture a Victorian woman adjusting her posture for the 100th time, you no longer see vanity. You see survival disguised as grace. You walk through an imagined parlor one last time, noticing details you missed before. The hushed voices, the careful movements, the endless negotiations of status and morality. These people lived in a world full of invisible threats. Illness without explanation, poverty without safety nets, technologies arriving faster than beliefs could adapt. Etiquette became their shield, their language, their architecture of certainty. Even when it squeezed the life out of them, it also held them upright. Turning to the servants' quarters, you recognize another truth. The rules that demanded invisibility from some also preserved a fragile balance between households and the workers who kept them running. The structure was deeply flawed, often unfair, yet it offered a map through daily interactions that might otherwise fracture under pressure. In a time before modern boundaries, the rules became boundaries, however imperfect. Outside on the streets, The contradictions of elegance and squalor return to you. You remember the horse-drawn carriages passing by, children running barefoot, the gleaming shop windows sharing alleys with crumbling walls. Somehow, these strange rules stitch disparate worlds together, allowing people to move through a city that existed in several centuries at once. They navigated uncertainty with polished shoes, steady posture, and an unwavering belief that dignity could be maintained even when the world refused to cooperate. When you revisit the rules of emotion, the quiet grief, the hidden desire you find, tenderness hidden beneath the restraint. They believed feelings were too powerful to release without preparation, so they tucked them under lace, coded them into letters, allowed them to flicker through music. You see that their restraint was not suppression alone. It was also reverence. And then you think of their superstitions, their rituals, the charms tucked into pockets, the bells above doorways, the careful avoidance of cracks and drafts. These, too, feel less like nonsense now and more like an attempt to fill the gaps left by an uncertain world. When science wavered, superstition stepped in to steady, trembling hands. It was fear, yes, but also hope disguised as habit. As you pull farther away, the entire era takes on the glow of something intricate and improbable. A world ridiculous in its rules, ingenious in its inventiveness, fragile in its certainty, yet astonishing in its ability to keep millions of people moving in harmony, however stiffly and silently. You exhale, realizing you have been holding Victorian air in your lungs for far too long. The modern world feels softer now, less rigid, more forgiving. Yet a small part of you carries their lessons like faint embroidery beneath plain cloth. The Victorians were absurd, yes, but their rules were also a grand attempt to create order, meaning, and dignity in a universe that often offered none. You step fully out of their world, letting it settle behind you like a heavy velvet curtain closing after a long performance. And for the first time, you understand that the show was never just for appearances. It was how they managed to live it all.